May I have everyone's attention, please? Thank you very much. This is the March 19th, 2012 Municipality of Anchorage Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. May I have the roll call, please?
Connie Yoshimura.
Here.
Bruce Phelps.
Here.
Stacy Dean.
Here.
Terry Parks.
Here.
Dana Pruz. Here. Richard Wilson.
Here.
Ray Hickel.
There's Ray.
Ray Hickel.
Here. Say here, Ray.
Peter Mulcahy.
Here.
Rich Wilson, did you call on it?
Rich Wilson. I did.
Okay. All right. Very good. We have a quorum. There are no minutes today. Special order of business disclosures. Commissioner Parks, would you please do disclosures?
Yes. Commissioner Phelps?
No.
Commissioner Deans?
No.
Commissioner Hickel? Commissioner Hickel?
No.
Commissioner Pruz? Mrs. Yoshimura?
No.
Commissioner, okay, I got one step ahead of me. Commissioner Wilson?
None.
And I have none.
All right. Thank you very much. There are no items on the consent agenda items, so we're moving immediately into item number E, unfinished business and actions of public hearing. The case is 2011-104. The petitioner is the Municipality of Anchorage. The request is the provisionally adopted Title 21 rewrite chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 13, and draft Chapter 14 in addition to the 106 proposed amendments. This is the continuation of the public hearing from March 12, 2012. The public hearing is still open. The procedure by which the public may speak to the Commission at its meetings is, 1, there's no staff presentations tonight. 2, persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission Rules of Procedures. A, representatives of groups, community councils, PTAs, etc., shall have 5 minutes. There is only one representative per group. If you are a member of another group and wish to testify, you do that as an individual, which will be for 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. I have a computer screen in front of me, and if a commissioner has a question, they push on the screen, and their name pops up. If I don't see any commissioners on the screen, then that means there are no questions from that particular individual or representative that's speaking, and you may sit down. When your testimony is complete, I've already answered that. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes. Appeals must be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after the Planning and Zoning Commission's final decision. Any individual may request written findings from any commission decision within 7 days. I do have some additional comments that I would like to make. We are taking public testimony, but do not expect to make a decision tonight. However, I will be very strict about the time limits. When you hear the buzzer, I expect you to stop talking because that means your time is up. Testimony will be limited to the case before the Commission, and in that regard, all of the provisionally adopted chapters, not just the 106 amendments, you are free to comment on. If you agree with the previous speakers, note that you concur. That would be a benefit to us rather than repeating testimony. Now, here's a fun one. Clapping, booing, jeering, or outbursts of any type are not allowed. And everyone is entitled to their beliefs and opinions about this case. And we are entitled to hear everyone's testimony clearly without any interruption from the audience. Special accommodations for individuals wishing to testify early because of age or health-related issues or disabilities. We invite you to come forward first. We have had one person who wishes to speak first, at the beginning, towards the beginning of the hearing, and that is Helen Nienhauser. And so if she's here, we would like to hear from her. First, I would ask that even if some of us may know those of you that are going to speak, but even if we know you, if you would please state your name clearly. If it's less than a monosyllable, if you would please spell the name for the benefit of the secretary, it would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's go. You're first.
Okay, thank you. And my name is Helen Nienhauser, and I think you have the spelling, but it's Nienhueser. And I'm here to speak on behalf of the Rogers Park Community Council. We actually adopted this resolution in November, expecting that you were going to take it up at that time. I just wanted to note that there were 35 people present at that meeting, and this resolution passed with 26 in favor, 5 opposed, and 4 abstentions. So I think it's fair to say that Rogers Park, in general, the majority of us definitely support the provisionally adopted version of Title 21. I'll just read what we passed. Whereas Anchorage's Land Use Code, Title 21, badly needs to be updated, whereas the revision process was begun in 2002, where there have been 5 drafts with extensive public review, whereas many compromises have been made from the aspirations of Anchorage 2020, our adopted comprehensive plan, whereas the Anchorage Assembly Title 21 Committee painstakingly reviewed and frequently changed drafts of the code, whereas the Anchorage Assembly has provisionally adopted all but one of the 14 chapters of the code, whereas on October 19th, Mayor Dan Sullivan released a proposal to amend the provisionally adopted Title 21. Therefore, be it resolved that Rogers Park Community Council recommends the following actions. First, reject the proposal to delete all of the design standards for single-family homes. Reject the proposal to decrease setbacks from streams to 25 feet from the proposed 50 feet to 100 feet in the provisionally adopted code. Reject the proposal to delete height restrictions in the B3 zone in Midtown unless strong protections for residential sunlight are in place. Reject the proposal to increase the allowed commercial uses in the industrial I-1 zones. Wait until completion of the Anchorage Commercial Land Study and adoption of the Anchorage Bowl Land Use Plan map to re-examine the uses allowed. Reject the proposal to reduce private open space requirements. Reject the proposal to delete the connectivity index needed for easier walking and biking. Approve Title 21 as is and propose a clearly written alternative later. Reject changes that diminish neighborhood protection height transitions. Reject the proposal to decrease sidewalks on cul-de-sacs. Reject language that would decrease landscaping standards when the mayor's proposal to rewrite that section is implemented. Reject language that decreases standards for multifamily and townhouse development. If language is included that allows for expedited changes to the code, in cases where clear mistakes were made in the rewrite, ensure that such changes are made case by case and not allowed to apply across all other sections of the code. And we ask that you adopt or pass on for adoption Title 21 as expeditiously as possible. We've been waiting a long time. We care a lot about this community. Thank you.
Are there any questions? I don't see any, but I have a question.
Okay.
What are the boundaries of the Rogers Park Community Council?
Well, I can't tell you streets, but I can tell you subdivisions. It's Rogers Park, it's College Village, and I'm not sure, perhaps part of College Village is part of another one, but the part that's near Northern Lights anyway. And what I call South Anchor Park, which is where I live, that little subdivision at the corner of Northern Lights and Lake Otis.
So do you have any commercial properties in your community council?
A few. The ones on the corner. what used to be Kinko's is now FedEx. There's couple little restaurants. There's a Brown Jug, I think. That little complex.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Planning and Zoning Commission, my name is Tom McGrath, M-C-G-R-A-T-H. I've read the BOMA letter, which I believe you have, and the follow-on letter from architect Don Dwiggins, and I agree that there are many problems with the rewrite of Title 21. The most glaring problem is the huge cost impact on building in Anchorage and the impact of causing most buildings to become non-compliant. I've been involved with the Midtown plan, which has been shelved. The plan is imaginative, but so much so that it bears no relationship to Midtown Anchorage as we know it, or as it could ever be. Unfortunately, parts of Midtown Anchorage are rotting while waiting for Anchorage 2020, the update of Title 21, the Midtown District Plan, and the new land use map yet to be completed. I've been a builder of small projects on my own since 1983. I built again in 1987, 93, 98, and 2010. I was going to build a larger building several years ago, but after waiting for the bureaucracy for so many years, I've sold the land and kind of given up. I guess you could say I got old waiting. I urge you to throw out the rewrite of Title 21 and not pass the provisionally adopted sections of Title 21. It would make building so expensive in Anchorage that the only people building housing would be institutions and nonprofits. Fewer and fewer owner builders would be able to enter the marketplace, and because of nonconformity, existing stock could not be bought, sold, or improved. We are developing a catch-22 that will cause stagnation in Anchorage and will kill initiative and innovation. Thank you, and please do not seek to add regulation and complexity, but instead seek to make the process easier with fewer rules. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Please come forward.
Chairman Yoshimura, members of the Commission, I shall be breathtakingly brief. My name is Chuck Becker. I live in Woodside East, which is about Lake Otis and Northern Lights, a fully developed area. And I've looked at the proposed Title I revision that you have before you, and I'm opposed to it in its current form. If it should happen that this version goes forward, please ensure that this Title 21 is subjected to a professional cost analysis, that it may carry a fiscal note as it moves to the Assembly. The analysis should include an assessment of the increased costs of development, the cost to the municipality, and the impact on economic development. Thank you.
I don't see any questions. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is John Weddleton. It's W-E-D-D-L-E-T-O-N. And some of you would know that I was on the Planning Commission for a few years. And at my confirmation, an assemblyman who seemed very nervous about my appointment gave me some guidance. And he told me that my personal view of the way things should be was not a factor on the commission. He said it was my job to enforce the adopted plans and follow Title 21. And I don't always agree with that man. But in this case, he was right, and I followed that advice as a commissioner. And Anchorage's most fundamental plan is our comprehensive plan, whose core document says that that plan becomes a public declaration of the policies that will guide decisions of the Municipal Assembly and the Planning and Zoning Commission. And that plan looks to the future. And that comprehensive plan lays out the most critical concern, which you heard earlier at your work session, and roughly that's that at current zoning, Anchorage Bowls remaining vacant land and underdeveloped residential land can support about 20,700 additional dwelling units. Anchorage should plan to provide for 31,600 more households. You heard different numbers, but essentially the same message earlier. Business as usual won't work as we struggle to accommodate that growth. And Anchorage's citizens, through the comprehensive plan, tell us that they want to grow in a way so that Anchorage is more than just a cheap place to sleep. As Anchorage fills all its available land, we must protect the city's quality of life, both to attract new business and take care of the families that are living and working here now. So the question was raised, does Anchorage 2020 still represent the mood of Anchorage? I would say the themes of Anchorage 2020 have been continuously reinforced with recent plans, the bike and pedestrian plans, the Hillside District Plan, the West Anchorage Plan, the Downtown Eagle River Plan, and others show that citizens of Anchorage expect future development to be better than what we've seen in recent history. I've also been asked, should we let the market decide? Well, we have these plans and we make land use laws because the free market mechanism fails to bring us to an optimal solution in many land use cases. So now you're in a position to set those laws, and in doing so, there are times when you may pick winners and losers. In our land use plans, the citizens of Anchorage have stated clearly they don't want to be the losers. And as brought up at the last meeting, what will be your guiding principles? The first speaker told you to go decide amongst yourselves what your guiding principles will be for evaluating the new code. And that's completely ridiculous, because you have those guiding principles in our adopted plans. And when you review the provisionally adopted Title 21, the first consideration is how does that promote the goals of our adopted plans. That's not only common sense, but it's also state and city law. The guidance I was given at my confirmation hearing is by the man who's now known as the consultant, and it still holds true. Let Anchorage's plans be your guide. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Mr. Wellington, I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, let me thank you for your public service by serving on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Secondly, I would like to know what your opinion is on smaller lots that are less than 6,000 square feet. That would be fee simple.
Well, that's a big question. I think that would have to go through a big process. We have something similar to that now where you can do an accessory dwelling unit, I think in R2 and R3 and some other residential zones, which would let you put a small house where there's already a house. So that, if you have a 6,000 square foot lot, I don't know if that is allowed with an ADU, but you do get quite a bit more density there. And one of the amendments proposed is to allow ADUs in R1, which again would bring some of that density. But when that was brought forward to have ADUs in R1 7 or 8 years ago, it met a lot of resistance for the people in R1. So if it helps, people are going to move here and we need to be ready to deal with it. And it can be uncomfortable unless we're careful. So that might be one solution, but it'll have to be carefully thought out.
The other question that I would ask you is, in the Title 20 rewrite, as a former commissioner, I would ask you this question. There is a lot of authority that is currently in the hands of the Planning and Zoning Commission that is transferred, would be in the provisionally adopted chapters of Title 21, be transferred to the Urban Design Commission. And I'm wondering what your opinion is on that matter.
There were cases where the Urban Design Commission had people on it who had more expertise in the areas that were being considered than I think the Planning Commission did. So I think there are cases where if you could pass a decision on to a body that has the ability to review it better, that is a good idea. But I think it is true. It is a delegated responsibility from the Planning Commission. So when we were on the commission, there were times where we took on the entire review rather than having some of it go to the Urban Design Commission. And I would expect that to be continued.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. May we have the next person, please?
Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Anand Dubey. That's spelled as A-N-A-N-D-D-U-B-E-Y. I'm a resident of Forest Road, which is behind Guineas. About 10 years ago, I bought a bed and breakfast in that area, shut it down, and turned it into a residence. Today, I'm here to tell you a story about the code enforcement people. My big fear with Title 21 is that we're going to be empowering the Nazi organization that currently exists, that I call the code enforcement people. Essentially, we were a victim of an extortion attempt by a renter. This renter comes to us and says, "Hey, give me $2,000, or I will call the code enforcement people on you." We told them to go ahead. That's exactly what they did. Within 24 hours, we had the Muni on our doorsteps. They turned our house upside down. You know what they found? They found something wrong with the electricals in a shed. That's all it was. And I discovered that day that as a resident, I had lost all rights, meaning the Muni was able to come into my property without my permission. The reason I'm telling you this story, ladies and gentlemen, is because I need you to know that whatever is happening with Agenda 21, it could lead to the loss of individual rights. And that's pretty much the bottom line. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for your testimony. May the next person please come forward.
Madam Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, my name is Tyler Robinson. I'm with Cook Inlet Housing Authority. We're a developer of mixed-use, townhome, multifamily, and single-family developments here in Anchorage. Our mission is to create affordable housing. We also build market-rate housing and some commercial development as well. We always try to balance our costs with the long-term operational effectiveness of our properties. And in addition to that, we take very seriously the community desires and neighborhood goals when we undertake those developments. Over the past couple of years and couple of months, we've worked closely with Dan Coffey in his capacity, as well as planning staff, to address a number of our issues that we had. We basically hired our designers to go through and review the code relative to either proposed or recently built developments, and I think that's led to a number of the amendments that you see in your packet today. So we do support those technical edits as a way to move forward on this code. You know, that said, I think there's still some work to do, and I think we're willing to roll up our sleeves to help staff and the Commission and the Assembly get to a place that helps us continue to do our jobs as affordable housing providers here. In the process of reviewing the code and coming here tonight, I sort of started thinking about our Lusac Place development, which is a 120-unit development down near Chester Creek, and started to reflect on the changes that would be sort of imposed by the code if we were operating under the new code. I think some of them are illustrative of maybe some changes that still need to take place. I'd like to give you a few of those examples. First of all, it was unclear whether the development would fall under the definitions of townhome, duplex, multifamily. When you consider that we also have a commercial development, a community building on site, we would likely have to go through 4 different design guidelines through the course of that development process. Obviously, we would want that process streamlined. Building separation of either 20 feet for townhome developments or 25 feet for multifamily is a new provision in this code, and it would certainly affect portions of our site. It's a very tight site, but we believe it's done sort of in a well-thought-out manner. Again, if you set aside for the simple fact that we wouldn't know which ones were multifamily or townhomes, so we'd be hitting a moving target, it still is a net increase in the land area that we would be required to have. I think there's some changes that could take place to make more consistent the requirements for townhome and multifamily within the code, rather than have 2 totally different sections. The process we would be required to go through would likely be a major site plan review that would throw us in a totally different process and likely not meet the timeline of our funders and financing. We'd be required to place sidewalks on 2 sides of the street, whereas we opted to provide pathways opposite the streets, not alongside the streets, which we feel will better cater to the future residents of that site. Additional private open space requirements. Again, we believe in open space, but we'd like more flexibility there. In short, if I could just make a final comment. I thought I had 5. I got 3.
Well, I am confused about what you are. If you
I'll wrap
All
up.
right. And there is a question in the queue, so I think you'll have some opportunity.
Again, we don't object to the general intent of a lot of the provisions of Title 21. We incorporate them in our development. However, some of them are, in our opinion, a little bit too prescriptive, a little bit too detailed, and somewhat difficult to sort of hit, if you will. So we would like to continue to work on this process to streamline and simplify those code provisions so that we can still achieve the intent of Title 21 and the plans and the community desires, but also not render infeasible our developments.
All right. Commissioner Mulcahy.
Yes, sir. I think I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'll make sure I understand. So you're saying what was the name of the community? Lusac Plaza?
Lusac Place?
Lusac Place. So are you saying that it would either be significant financial impacts to make it conform, or you would end up non-conforming? Am I summarized pretty?
Well, I mean, it's obviously we didn't design the project to the Title 21 rewrite.
Correct.
So that aside, what I'm trying to point out is some areas that I think still need some streamlining or maybe some additional flexibility so that you don't impact the feasibility and we can make small alterations. Obviously, we design these buildings, we're going to hit the code. But if something is, a more significant issue in terms of us really needing to spread out our buildings, that's got an impact, and that affects how many units we can put on the development, and therefore that affects the affordability of housing.
Absolutely, I understand. So I appreciate you having done that analysis on that set of properties or that property. Have you looked at some of the other properties that you own? Would there be similar impacts?
We have, and like I said, working with staff and Mr. Coffey ahead of time, we made what we thought were a lot of amendments that you have before you that address some of the glitches, I think, that we're likely to see with a new code. That said, we engage in redevelopment, which means we buy property with a lot of hair on it. They're not easy to develop. They're different sites. They've got, they might have, bluff areas, elevations, and I think the idea is that, as any designer knows, each site is unique, and you have to have some flexibility built into the process to make sure that you can achieve the intent of the code, but sort of take into account the uniqueness of a particular property.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Phelps?
A couple questions. First, did you put down your comments in writing?
Yeah, we have due to some comments that we got back from staff a little bit late, we will have that to staff tomorrow, and that you will have in your packet.
Okay. You had mentioned a couple of times about the recommendations from Dan Coffey. Just to probe a bit, did you work with him fairly extensively? And the other part of the question is, do you feel generally comfortable with the recommendations made by Coffey?
I don't think, I think what happened is the report that came from the consultant was a combination of, his outreach to, I would guess, people here, people in the community. I think that when we look at our particular issues that we had, those issues were encompassed in the report. Does that mean that I endorse the entire report? No, we look at our own sort of interest and our mission and try to understand, balance our needs and our desires with what we know is the community's desires as well. So I know it's a wishy-washy answer, but like I said, a lot of the issues that we had are being carried forward by staff's comments. Those that staff didn't agree with us on are part of our written comments back to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. May we have the next person, please?
I do some handouts.
All right.
My name is Mary Wondzell, Wondzell. Thank you. I don't have to stand on my toes. I'm here to ask for some restrictions. Mainly, I wanted you to understand what the definition of churches have become. I have one side that's the 1960s, the 1980s, and then the present time. In the 1960s, usually one pastor. Now it's 2+ pastors, sometimes 5 and more. The boards often disagree, usually with the new churches. Most of the boards have been yes boards. The Bible sermons used to be quite long in the old days. Bible sermons are now less than 20 minutes. Hymns, 30 minutes, low to medium volume. Now hymns are replaced by very loud music, many modern hip type with vibrant, loud decibel bass often heard outside the buildings, which annoy the neighbors. The parishioners, there used to be just a few helped. Now they're involved in running the churches. The small churches were only used on Sunday. These large churches that are coming into our region now are they're large. They have explosive growth. They have non-profit status, which allows parishioners to make large tax-exempt donations, and many churches do not pay taxes. In the old days, it just concentrated on worship. Now it's concentration on expansion. looking for rural areas where zoning laws are less restrictive. They build classrooms to accommodate childcare, preschool, kindergarten, 6th grade, and beyond. Studies show that when classrooms are built, explosive growth begins, followed by doubling of church size to meet needs. Growth continues until megachurch is built. Often satellite programs begin to accommodate the supersize. This church methodology has gone on unnoticed in residential areas because we failed to recognize their methods and restrict their size. Occupancy determines the impacts, and size restrictions must be established. Please. They should be required to have city, water, and sewer for all large non-residential establishments in large lot neighborhoods. That's about all I have, but I just wanted you to know that there is a heck of a difference between the churches that we thought of and the churches nowadays. They are big money. I mean, $5 million is a drop in the bucket to them. And they're drawing in a lot more than that every week.
Thank you very much for your testimony. It is very much appreciated. Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Greg Stoddard, S-T-O-D-D-A-R-D, and thank you for letting me speak here tonight. It'll be very short. Often, good intentions have unexpected negative ramifications. And I'm afraid that if you move this forward in any form, you're going to see a lot of negative ramifications of this. So I ask you, please do not move this forward at all. I don't know why it has to be done now, if it has to be done at all, and I don't think it has to be done at all. The unintended consequences could be illustrated, as a previous gentleman spoke of businesses, for instance, in buildings that are non-compliant. If everybody had all the money in the world to do what they wanted to do and make things better, then that might be one thing. But I think you can all realize that the whole country is under some pretty heavy economic constraints. We're a little bit luckier here, but especially now, the unintended consequence will be something people will not be able to afford. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Will the next person please come forward?
Madam Chairman, members of the Commission, my name is Terry Schoenthal, last name S-C-H-O-E-N-T-H-A-L. I'm a practicing landscape architect here in Anchorage. I have been since our current Title 21 was in its infancy. I believe Title 21 is a positive, has been a strong positive benefit to our community, but I have significant concerns about the new provisionally adopted version, primarily because I just believe that it favors complexity over simplicity. I'm a strong advocate for the 2020 plan that we have, but I truly believe that every word in Title 21 comes with a price tag. We have to keep it as absolutely simple and concise as we possibly can. I focus my comments on the landscape portion of the provisionally adopted version, and a couple of key things that I would call to your attention are that I believe that every aspect of all the legally binding requirements of Title 21 should be in Title 21, and Title 21 currently calls for a design guideline or a design or another document that goes with it that currently doesn't exist, yet it still carries the weight of law, in essence. And I think it's extremely unfair to have a document that's out there that we don't even know what it actually will be. And the municipality has a long history of not being very nimble about updating documents of that nature. As the landscape architect, that particular document states that we have to comply with an appropriate plant list. Well, Anchorage has a whole lot of different climatic microclimates within it, and there's plants that will grow some places and not in others. So there are some strong financial implications, I think, as well.
You have more time. Did you?
Oh, I thought I heard a buzzer going off.
No, that was a cell phone.
No. I apologize. The strongest financial implication is the requirement for a surety of 120% of the landscape value. That is an unreasonable expectation. First, it doesn't identify what what the landscape is included in that. For example, is that topsoil? Is it all the other things that go with it? Or is it just the plant materials? And I've never had a case where 100% of the plant materials have died, let alone 120%. So that's a case in point. Another case I think that's really important is our industrially zoned properties are now going to be required to have 15 feet of buffering instead of 10 in most cases where they abut residential or other uses. Most of our industrially zoned properties are not much bigger than a residentially zoned lot, so you can imagine that has an impact on building owners.
Okay. Just stay put. There are some questions in the queue from Commissioner Dean.
Through the chair, my question was, you had mentioned a design manual. Are you referring to the design criteria manual?
No, I'm not. The new Title 20, the provisionally adopted, refers to the Title 21 User's Guide. And that Title 21 User's Guide is identified throughout the document as something that the municipality has to provide an update on a regular basis. It has legally binding requirements that are associated with it, yet they're not part of Title 21.
Are there any other commissioners with questions? Commissioner Phelps.
Have you put any of this in writing, where you've made very specific recommendations?
I have. I actually rewrote the section myself. I worked closely with Dan Coffey in the process of it. I was concerned about it enough. I think it's just badly, overly complicated. And I actually have copies of that with me. But I worked very closely with Dan Coffey. I met with builders. I met with other practitioners. And I'd like to see this go into action as helping out our 2020 plan. I just think it can be done in a much simpler fashion. The new version is 21 pages long. Right now, our existing one is 3, and what I propose is about 8 pages in length.
I remember from the Coffey report that was given to us last week is that there was a section on landscaping. Was that written by you?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions? Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Schoenthal. I would like to let you know that we have a vacancy on the commission.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right. Will the next person please come forward?
Madam Chair and the rest of the Commission, my name is Carolyn Ramsey, R-A-M-S-E-Y. I've been a resident of Anchorage since 1974, and I currently own a home in Midtown. The people of Anchorage deserve a world-class city, and I believe that we can have it. A city that offers good jobs, great urban spaces, healthy neighborhoods, clean air and water, and access to the wilderness. The provisionally adopted Title 21 was developed through 10 years of hard work and input from hundreds of Anchorage residents. Not one group walked away with everything they wanted. The rewrite was based on the values and goals of Anchorage residents, including private and public cost, families, community health and safety, economics, aesthetics, and our environment. It has been said that Anchorage is not a walking town. I disagree. My mother lives downtown, and one of the biggest reasons she does is because this allows her to walk to many of her destinations. Midtown was developed in the 1970s and 80s, and it was designed to accommodate the automobile, not the people. Yet many people, such as myself, have clearly stated that we would like an Anchorage to grow into an urban center where walking is safe, landscape is plentiful, and sunshine reaches the ground. I was stationed in Germany for 4 years, and I enjoyed being able to walk to many of my destinations around town. I'm here to tell you that it really does improve the quality of life. What Anchorage Midtown currently has now is high-speed traffic, acres of asphalt, limited green space, trees, and shrubs, tall towers casting long shadows that are made worse by Anchorage's subarctic locations and low winter sun, lack of affordable housing within walking distance of jobs. Burdened by these problems, Midtown is known for the dangerous streets where Midtown pedestrians who are hit by a car 7 times more likely to die than people hit downtown. The few spaces to sit down and visit or have lunch, toxic stormwater runoff from big parking lots into our waterways, forcing people into their cars to get from one place or another instead of walking. Title 21 tried to address these issues by restricting height buildings in the B3 zone all over town to 3 stories, coupled with 2 strategies for restoring height to some properties. A special Midtown zoning district from the Midtown Plan that allows greater height while protecting sunshine and respecting established neighborhoods. The opportunity to rezone into mixed-use districts that allow taller buildings while concentrating residential and commercial growth are more walkable, transit-oriented development. The mayor's amendments have thrown us basically under the bus in Midtown. to continue growing helter and skelter, dominated by automobiles and threatening people who want to walk and sit outdoors during their lunch hour. To meet the goals of Anchorage's comprehensive plan and become a desirable place to work and live, Midtown needs design standards to protect the sunlight, to provide incentives to rezone into walkable transit-oriented mixed-use districts, to return to the table and work with neighborhoods and property owners to finalize a Midtown plan that respects both Anchorage's community goals and private property rights. It's your job to implement 2020. Amendments that reject Midtown zones and allow unlimited Midtown heights to feed business as usual. People clearly asked for a city that built a livable urban center with strong, healthy neighborhoods. I urge you to reject the mayor's amendments and help Anchorage into the future, not leave it stuck in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Will the next person please come forward? No clapping, or you will be removed. Thank you.
The hand up.
My name is Gordon Thompson, Thompson. I'm an architect in Anchorage. I've been practicing here since 1970. It's 42 years, if you can believe that. I'm here to speak about the commercial design standards and some of the cost impact of those. I'd like to make the point that as a practicing architect, I do not support the idea of architectural design standards for commercial projects. Building design always begins with a site, because site conditions tell us the best building location and help us with the building form, orientation, even with exterior finishes and materials. Rather than letting us properly evaluate a site, the rewrite tries to dictate where buildings should be located on the site, whether it makes sense or not. What I've handed you are some sketches showing how an architect might examine a site under provisions of the rewrite. The reason I gave you those is some of you may not have worked with an architect and kind of understand the mysterious ways that we do things. The site that I've given you is the heavily studied Alaska USA Anchorage Financial Center on 36th Avenue. I designed the building and the site in 2004. It's been, as I said, very heavily studied during this rewrite process. Sketch A shows the site as it is built today. B shows the building fronting on 36, as suggested by Title 21. And Sketch C shows the building placed on the corner of 36 and Center Point, as also suggested by Title 21. Over on the side, on the first sheet, I listed, I think, 16 considerations that an architect would use to evaluate the site plans. My point is this: the design menu was written with no regard for our training and experience as architects, but instead gives us multiple choice design options which will have the effect of dumbing down design, the equivalent of paint by numbers art, in my opinion. Let me point out it takes over 10 years of education, internship, and examination to become a registered architect. We need, as a community, to attract the best and the brightest of these architects. The design standards in the rewrite will have the opposite effect because it limits design opportunities for future generations of architects that want to practice here. Another point I'd like to make has to do with building costs. I work in the commercial. I do a lot of commercial design work. Today, a 30,000 square foot building would cost $2 million more than it would have in 2005. I'm putting the price in 2005 at about $5 million. Today, it would be about $7 million. That's a cost increase of 40% in the last 7 years. And so, as close as I can tell, about half that increase is due to rising materials cost, doubling of freight, 15%.
We have several questions in the queue. Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, I was curious, one of the things that's come up in the new Title 21 is maximum setbacks. Is that something that you offer in your second set of drawings on page B? Is that what you were looking at by placing the building so close to 36?
Title 21, one of the versions I read, the emphasis was to place the building on the street for pedestrian orientation so you can have an entry right off the sidewalk. So that's why it's placed against 36.
So drawing B is an example of maximum setback then?
Well, it's an example of placing a building on 36. It doesn't really have anything to do with a maximum setback. The same as example C is a sampling showing the building placed in the corner and what the impact of parking and traffic flow internal would be. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Wilson.
You were about to describe the cost impacts. Could you continue?
Okay, thank you. Let's see, where was I? I said we had a $5 million building. The cost increase has been about 40%, so we're up to about $7 million now. I suspect half of that increase, or about $1 million, is due to additional regulation. In other words, about 20% of the cost increase that we're seeing is due to additional regulation in the last 7 years. We found no other reason for building prices to go up that much. I work with a lot of contractors, and we all kind of came to the same opinion. Here's my point. The rewrite authors insist that only a little cost here, a little cost there, nothing to worry about. I think that's the kind of thinking that got us to this 20% increase. And maybe I'm off by half. Maybe it's a 10% increase due to regulation.
And just to follow up, what could you kind of give me 2 or 3 things that you like about the revised code?
Not much, really. I really can't.
Fair enough.
No laughing. Commissioner Phelps.
A couple questions. Perhaps you can explain. You said that the revised code decreases your flexibility, and yet you also mentioned that the revised code provides a set of a menu option, drop-down menu option.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain why that a drop-down menu option that's intended to provide flexibility does not, in fact, provide flexibility?
I don't see a need for a menu, a list of items for us to comply with. It's basically check off this, okay, I met that, I don't have to meet that one, I'll take 2 from this column and meet that. That's really not how design works, if that answers your question. You know, we're a lot of our coursework and a lot of our daily work is with design and coming up with ideas. And if we've always got this menu thing we've got to try and comply with, I think it's going to be stifling.
So do you think that the existing Title 21, as it relates to your work, is more compatible with flexibility than the revised Title 21?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's my opinion.
I don't know if you had the opportunity of reviewing the previous architects. I'm going to mispronounce the last name, excuse me, Schofield. He had developed a series of recommendations, and have you had the opportunity of taking a look at those?
I don't remember seeing those. I did sit, though, consulted with Mr. Coffey quite a bit and sat in many of the subcommittee meetings as we went over the design standards, and were able to eliminate a lot of those that were quite onerous.
So the Coffey report makes a number of recommendations. I'm getting the impression that you tended to agree with many of those recommendations because they derive from discussions with the development community?
I'm sorry?
I'm asking the question of, are you comfortable with the recommendations of the Coffey report because they represent resolutions of many of your concerns?
I need to re-review that. I haven't had an opportunity. I've been so busy at working. I haven't had a chance to look at it, so I can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Parks.
To the chair, I guess I'd have a question. If you were to make 3 or 4 changes that would be critical to helping Anchorage look better, but would not encumber your ability to work, what would they be that you know that are in Title 21 today and the provisional?
Well, again, I would limit or eliminate entirely the commercial design standards. I don't see any reason for those whatsoever. I think that's at the core of my dislike for it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Mulcahy.
Thank you. Several people have testified about estimates on how many facilities would become non-conforming on the passage of this. in your experience in the facilities that you've worked on? Any feel for that?
I don't have much of a feel for it. I've listened to some of the testimony, and I don't fully understand how that would work. What I've heard is that some existing buildings would no longer be allowed to have the occupancy that they had. Perhaps a law firm, pick an occupancy, but they would become non-conforming because the Title 21 is so specific in that it says that these uses can no longer exist in there. Is that it?
Okay. If there are no other questions, I have one question for you.
Sure.
Is the overreaching regulations, is that because of a delay in approvals, or is it because you have to go to a series of boards and/or commissions in order to get your approvals, or can you just be more specific about that?
To have to submit our design across the counter at the municipality and have it reviewed by those that aren't trained as we are, through the whole 10, 12-year process, I think challenges what we do as architects. I mean, why do we even practice if it's going to be by menu, by multiple choice? It blocks our creative approach to how we design buildings. It limits our interest actually in trying to do some cutting edge stuff to develop new trends and work with the environment.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Would the next person please come forward?
Hello, my name is Marilyn Hauser. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. I've lived in Anchorage for 35 years, and my husband and I bought our home in Midtown in 1981. It's Midtown at Fireweed and Seward. Just a comment about the previous testimony. No need for commercial design standards of any kind. Check out the southwest corner of Boniface and Northern Lights sometime. It's got to be one of the ugliest commercial properties in Anchorage, and there's not a lick of landscaping on that commercial property. I participated in many of the Anchorage 2020 meetings, as did hundreds of Anchorage residents, and have been dismayed by the long ongoing process to undo many of the land use policies that would make Anchorage a more livable city now and in the future. If you make a city livable and attractive, it engenders a sense of pride, enthusiasm, ownership, and commitment. If you feel like you're living in a parking lot or a storage lot, you don't have any commitment to your neighborhood. I enjoy my Midtown location. I walk in my neighborhood. I was stunned at my community council meeting in December when Dan Coffey said in his presentation that he wouldn't even think of crossing on foot the Seward Highway at Northern Lights or Benson. I do it all the time, as do many others. I even did it this evening, and at more than $4 a gallon for gasoline, it makes sense to get out and walk, and it's healthier too. I walk my dogs in my neighborhood. I recreate in my neighborhood. I also clean up after my dogs year-round. I also pick up the litter year-round. I report problems to the appropriate city department when I notice them, for example, when a street light is out. I oppose the following changes that were made by Mayor Sullivan. I do not support unlimited building height in Midtown. I don't support any efforts to lessen the height transition requirements between business and residential areas. I don't support expedited procedures for amending Title 21. The public process and participation should remain a part of the process, not just a quick fix for a developer. I oppose stream setbacks being reduced to 25 feet, but prefer that they be established at 50 to 100 feet. I support sidewalks, bike lanes, sidewalks to businesses, and mass transit. I want the many neighborhoods of Anchorage to comprise a livable city where not one where developers get to build whatever they want, make lots of money, then live somewhere else. We in Anchorage are fortunate to live in a beautiful coastal setting with the Chugach Mountains to the east. Nature's bounty does not give us a pass to build an ugly, unlivable city. No more compromise. Adopt Title 21.
Thank you for your testimony. Would the next person please come forward?
Sure, Commission and Chairman. My name is Blair Wanzell. That's W-O-N-D-Z-E-L-L. I've lived in Anchorage quite a number of years, since the mid-'60s. And when I talk to people from outside, one of the two best things I can say about Anchorage is we have a tremendous view of the Chugach Mountains, and we have a coastal trail that's probably second to none, maybe throughout the world. The mountains, there's similar things other places, but coastal trails is virtually unbeatable. We have a lot of bicycle trails. I've been on the coastal trail several times and walked its length. I've biked on a lot of the bicycle trails. I wish there were more of them. And I think that we do need more trails, extend the coastal trail, more bike trails. And to change step here, we live out in the Rabbit Creek area where we have the large lots. They were developed at 2.5 acres. They were also arranged so that you could have 2 residences on the 2.5 acres or 1 residence per acre and a half. And certainly that need had to do with the need to have our own wells and our septic systems and not wanting them to get them too close. And I would suggest that any time somebody wants to combine lots and build mega structures for a lot of people, that perhaps beyond some size limit, I don't know what size that might be, maybe 15,000, 20,000 square feet, there ought to be sewer and water available to them, rather than depending on the aquifers, and a lot of them are stressed right now. I have the names of probably 6 people who have had problems with their wells, and in addition, 3 wells failed during a recent drawdown test at the church. And I really have nothing more to say on that tonight. My wife talks, so I can let her be the only one here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Vincent Fisher. I'm going to start off with a quote tonight. All tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent. And that was Thomas Jefferson. And that's why I'm here tonight, to make sure my voice is heard loud and clear. I think I speak for the majority when I say reject all forms of Title 21. I move that the main motion be postponed indefinitely of Title 21, or Agenda 21, as it is also called. It threatens our sovereignty, both as a great state and as a great nation. Title 21 is a push for globalism at the local level and undermines the constitutional rights of individuals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this would be a good time to remind everyone that the issue before the board is, before the commission, are the provisionally adopted chapters of Title 21, and all comments should be addressed to those, and no comments regarding previous, past, or future cases. Thank you. Would you please proceed?
My name is Ray Craig. I am K-R-E-I-G. I am Vice President of the Boardwalk Condo Association, and I'm also a civil engineer. I'm going to talk about 2 previous cases, Madam.
Could I interrupt and say, are you speaking on behalf of your...
I am not.
All right, as an individual?
The item I passed out is our official condo association newsletter, and it'll have more detail on what I'm talking about, but we didn't have time to call the meetings and all that to come up with an official statement from the association. But I'm going to talk about 2 past cases before this commission, but I'm going to wind up saying something about Title 11. But to prove my case, or to demonstrate the case, I want to mention the Downtown Soup Kitchen and the Cordova Center halfway house owned by Cornell Corrections, which are within 1 block of our project. And these 2 things, we've been run through the Anchorage Planning and Zoning meat grinder.
So
we were not
I have to interrupt you and say that your comments need to be directed to the provisionally adopted chapters of Title 21 and the 106 amendments that have been publicly noticed.
Well, the bottom line on this is that all of these things were done with us. We never were notified, even though we are continually blitzed with all kinds of notices from the Planning and Zoning Commission, various changes, but these two large controversial projects, we never heard anything because the city's codes were changed by the proponents before they even made their applications. And the complex, I'm going to read something from the Downtown Soup Kitchen themselves.
Sir, you must direct your comments to the provisionally adopted chapters of Title 21 and the 106 amendments.
All right. I'm putting on this button. No Title 21. Our project was run through the meat grinder. The current system, which is protracted, complex, expensive labyrinth of land use planning and project permitting bureaucracy, and now enabled the Downtown Soup Kitchen to insert that project in our neighborhood by manipulating the current planning and zoning process. And the Downtown Soup Kitchen itself complained the Muni plan review process is arduous, encumbered by a bureaucracy not readily matched elsewhere in the United States. Now, you would think that I would come here and say, fix the loopholes. You know, go through with Title 21, I get them confused, and make it even more burdensome, make them go through even more protracted things to stop what's happening to us. But I think that it's quite obvious to many people that this just does not work. Mr. Coffey's efforts, I think, are credible. I think the proposed Title 21 is not something that's good for Anchorage. It's expensive. It's unfair. It's probably even more going to lead to even more corruption than we have in the system right now. So I think that not only should Mr. Coffey's changes probably be backed off of, I would urge the Commission and the Assembly to go into the existing Title 21 and start unwinding it. We would be better off.
Thank you for your testimony.
Okay.
The next person, please come forward.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Peter Muse, MJOS. I've been a public health physician in the state of Alaska for nearly 40 years. I'm past president of the Rogers Park Community Council, and I've served on the Mayor's Task Force for Obesity. The Comprehensive Plan 2020 is a national award winner. Hundreds of citizen volunteers and thousands of hours went into making this a vision for a healthy, livable, and progressive community. The vision, let me just read one of these, calls for a safe and healthy place to live where daily life is enriched by a wealth of year-round recreational and educational opportunities. This rests on all four of the Comprehensive Plan 2020 goals, which include land use and transportation goals, addressing designation of land for various private and public uses, design and environment goals address quality of the built and natural environments, and public improvements and service goals address public facilities and services. Alaska is one of the most obese states in the nation, and there's good reason for this. Most of our citizens, upwards of 70%, are sedentary, and certainly the climate contributes to this. There is no such thing as health without fitness. The comprehensive plan must address this. We must encourage and address and provide parks, trails, bicycle trails, commuter lanes, walkability, and park access. Safe access and safe facilities are incumbent on us, particularly for those residing in lower socioeconomic sectors of the community, without which they have no access, and they, in fact, are more sedentary and obese than the rest of the population. We must provide a welcoming, encouraging environment in all seasons. Anchorage has an undue emphasis on the automobile. Automobile traffic is inversely proportional to physical activity. And of course, that is compounded by emissions, which contribute to cardiac disease, asthma, and of course particulates, which we now know are incorporated even into the smallest cells of the brain, the heart, and the nervous system. Noise pollution is very real and very stressful. Established neighborhoods are often disrupted as we continue to expand our roadways. We must encourage clean, efficient, and non-polluting methods of transportation, including mass transit. I would respectfully request, in the interest... I'm sorry.
No comments from the audience. Would you please continue? You have 23 seconds.
I would respectfully request, in the interest of a healthy and livable Anchorage, that you honor the vision and the goals of the Comprehensive Plan 2020, which must be the template for Title 21. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I guess I'm not going to eat the brownie in the back room. Okay. Please come forward.
My name is Robin Lauster, R-O-B-Y-N-L-A-U-S-T-E-R. I have lived in Anchorage since 1962. I've heard Anchorage described as a place with none of the advantages of a big city and none of the charm of a small town. I love Anchorage, and I think it can do better if it plans carefully for the future. In the 1970s, I remember joining Anchorage's first rally for bicycle trails, and those trails have added immeasurably to the value of living in this city. I raised my children here, and now my grandchildren are growing up in Anchorage. Young people are choosing to live where it's safe to walk and bike. They know it's the healthy thing to do, and Anchorage needs to do better. At my age, I still prefer to walk and bike, but need to feel confident that to do so will be safe. I live in Turnagain, and I like biking and walking around. But Midtown was developed as a car place, not a people place. There are acres of asphalt parking lots and high-speed arterials. There are few places to walk or bike or sit out and have lunch in the summer. I'm afraid to ride in traffic, so I do some combination of riding on side streets, on sidewalks, and walking my bike across intersections. The provisionally adopted Title 21 was developed over 10 years of public give and take, a process that respected the input of citizens. I think it should be adopted as is and allow revisions as needed in the future using the public process. One of my concerns about Midtown is the height of buildings. Title 21 restricts the height of many commercial buildings to 3 stories, allowing more sunlight into our streets. A height transition standard improves the compatibility of higher intensity development with adjacent lower density of neighborhoods by guiding where building bulk is placed on a lot. As someone who has lived through 50 years of dark winters, I know how important sunlight can be for mental health. The height restrictions also provide incentives for property owners to rezone into mixed-use districts that would allow taller buildings while giving the public more walkable streets, open spaces, and landscaping. When the city stopped work on the Midtown plan, Midtown lost momentum for becoming more walkable and bikeable. Now the mayor's amendments return Midtown buildings to unlimited heights. This amendment also eliminates incentives for rezoning into the pedestrian-friendly mixed-use districts. This leaves Midtown repeating the mistakes of the past, encouraging Midtown property owners to continue building high-rise buildings and surrounded by seas of parking. This will not be a place where workers look forward to walking outside during their lunch hour or shoppers to take pleasure in their errands. Please think about Midtown's future. Vote for the limited building heights in Midtown and incentives for property owners to rezone into mixed-use districts. Recommend that the city pick up its work in the Midtown District Plan and establish standards that will begin building it into an employment center that welcomes people who want to walk or bike.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Would the next person please come forward?
Hi, Bethany Markham, M-A-R-C-U-M. Surveys show that the vast majority of Americans desire to live in a single-family home with a yard. The vast majority of Americans prefer that, not a condo or an attached townhome. And I expect this is true for Alaskans as well. I know it's true for my family. We have a reasonable home right now. It has a very small yard. A few years ago, we were in a situation financially that we were able to look for a larger home with a larger yard. The larger yard is more so what we were looking for. In other words, we were willing to pay the city of Anchorage more in property taxes, okay? I was willing to do that. Well, that didn't happen. We had trouble finding what we wanted, first of all, so then we started to work with the builder on having something built and looking for property. We were astounded to discover the scarcity and the cost of residential lots in Anchorage. Anchorage has a very serious shortage of home lots for families. That has driven the prices sky high, and now thanks to the provisionally adopted chapters of Title 21, it's going to get only worse. Title 21 is going to make Anchorage housing even more unaffordable. And that's because really what the Title 21, including the rewrite, is simply restrictions. A Harvard economist by the name of Edward Glasser states that housing restrictions make prices not only higher, but also more volatile. And as housing prices in Anchorage become more unaffordable, you can be sure that the growth of Anchorage will be affected. As is already happening, people will move to the Mat-Su Valley or elsewhere in the state, and the change we'll start seeing here in Anchorage is that more employers will start moving their jobs to where the people are. This is exactly what happened in Boulder, Colorado. It happened in Petaluma, California, when they implemented smart growth plans such as Title 21. In fact, as documented by a senior economist at the Thoreau Institute and a McCleskey Conservation Fellow at Yale, regions that have adopted smart growth or similarly restrictive planning programs tend to have the least affordable housing, whereas affordable regions remain relatively free of strict planning rules. Call me crazy, but telling me how much window area my new home has to have facing the street or what percentage of garage door space can face the street is just plain over-restrictive. As well-intentioned as Title 21 might be, it can't possibly take into account the desires of most homeowners or predict the future. U.S. planners are not at fault at all, but it's an historical fact that the promises made by city planners in the past have been impossible to keep. Consequently, the results of most attempts by government to plan communities is that they end up with more of what people don't want and shortages of what they do want. No one can see into the future. We don't need more government mandates. We need free market solutions for planning. Please, no Title 21 rewrite, no Title 21 at all. If you're unsure if my opinion jives with the rest of Anchorage, put it out to the voters. It's the only fair way to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. All right. We're going to take a break, and we hope when everyone comes back that they will follow the good rules of etiquette and order. Thank you. And to please turn off all your cell phones or put them on mute or whatever it is that you need to do, because it is very difficult to hear up here, especially in the assembly chambers. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Would the next person please come forward?
Find my thing off here. Silent. Okay. Good evening. My name is Gordon Glazer. I'm the Vice President of the North Star Community Council, which is right next to that Midtown, and a big shadow is cast on our Community Council.
Are you here representing the Community
Yes, I am.
Council? All right, thank you.
Madam Chairman and members of the Planning and Zoning, thank you for your patience going and listening to speaker after speaker. I feel very strongly, our Community Council feels very strongly about our concerns about changes to Title 21. We recognize there was a great deal of work put into it and a great deal of feeling. But we're particularly sensitive about Midtown. Much of Midtown is ugly and dangerous and dominated by a few powerful people who put secondary to the concern of the residents. Midtown, particularly around Fireweed, is a location of 3 schools, unrestricted height. The changing of Title 21, if it was dropped in terms of height restrictions, would have concerns in terms of what would happen in terms of roads and to the residents with the domination of a few large buildings. My understanding, if the height restrictions and the change comes in here, that those homes would be dominated. Besides their property values, the roads themselves will be filled with people coming in and coming out without any connection between the two. Title 21 is not perfect. Anchorage is not perfect. But it's certainly a vast improvement or direction in the right direction of what we want to go to in terms to a better community. I want to thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Excuse me. I don't see any questions in the queue at this time.
Thank you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Will the next person please come forward?
My name is Joel Campbell. And that's Campbell like the soup, but none of the money, Campbell. Madam Chairman, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen of the board, thank you for letting me speak. I hope not to take the 3 minutes. I pulled this up off the website that you have out there and then started reading through it, and it absolutely scared me to pieces. In parts here I read that reminded me of England and row houses and buildings that could possibly collapse if we have another earthquake. I was living in Colorado when one of the previous speakers talked about what happened in Boulder. It was a disaster. My question would be, is this what we want for Anchorage? Or can Anchorage expand? Think about expansion rather than trying to fit into a small bowl. I look at my grandchildren that are coming up. They're living in apartment houses right now because that's all they can afford. Will they be able to buy a house of some sort? Or will they be forced into another apartment? I had a bunch of things here to say that dealt with what is a northern city design concept. What is it? I looked at, I'm sorry I didn't read all 600 pages plus of Title 21, but I couldn't find anything. That concept thing comes off page 23 of this information that was on the internet. I'm not for it. I'm a private citizen and I own a private home. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I don't see any questions in the queue, so thank you. Will the next person please come forward?
My name is Russell Kell, and I think the reason we have some problems here with the amendments is because we are amending a 20th century plan to address 21st century problems. Just a few concerns I have with the current amendments. I do not believe, in my opinion, they adequately address the homeless. They're not sufficiently, they don't make a city that's sufficiently reflexive to future economic shocks or future demographic changes. And I don't believe they look at Anchorage in relationship to the rest of the world, and that relationship is going to be more and more significant over the next 20 to 50 years. To assist you, the September 2011 edition of Scientific American is directed almost entirely to cities and what future cities are going to be. I would suggest that you folks might want to take a look at it. And that concludes my testimony. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. If the Secretary would please make a note of the Scientific American, November 2011.
That's correct.
And could you spell your last name, please?
Oh, Kell.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Would the next person please come forward?
Hello. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Betty Smith, Smith. I have lived in quite a few places in Alaska, including the Valley and Cold Bay, and I learned to love Anchorage when I lived in Cold Bay. And I still love Anchorage. It's a wonderful place. It is everything in a small place. I use the trails. I live on the east side, but I work in Midtown. I have no problem finding ways to walk in Midtown in the summertime. But no matter what, every year it's dark, every year it's cold, and every year there's ice. And no matter how many trails you put in, I will always stay inside in Midtown during the winter. And I walk up and down the stairs in the tall building that I work in, and I enjoy every bit of exercise I get, whether it's indoors at home. And I have worked out at gyms. They're dotted all over the city. There's plenty of opportunity to work out in the winter time. I just think that we have enough regulation. I don't think we need to tighten all the regulations in this town, taking away further rights from individual property owners. And so I am against Title 21 and against the rewrites. Thank you.
Commissioner Phelps, I think I owe you an apology. Did you have a question for Mr.
I did,
Pell?
but that's-
And
yeah.
I believe he's left the building.
Thank you.
All right, my apologies.
No problem.
Would the next person please come forward?
Yes, my name is Lance Powell. I've lived in Anchorage, about over 35 years. I live near Service High School in the neighborhood. And I'm wanting to see that Anchorage can become a quality and attractive city. We've got a problem. The present code, if it's taken out and looked at, we can fit maybe 20,000 more households in this town. But the comprehensive plan tells us we're going to get 30,000 or more families. So it looks to me like we've got to do something different. And we can't just keep on doing what we've done before. Yeah, there are places in the code as it's revised. There will be increases in cost for landscaping and for screening of dumpsters and so on. But there also will be decreases in cost. We shouldn't need as much parking, and we shouldn't, and with the reduction in parking lots and so on, we should also have a savings in storm drains that take the water out into the inlet. Even the cost comparisons that the city did show that the revised code, Title 21, revisions to it will overall cause a decrease in cost. And I would urge you that look for the long term, not so much the short term where you're focused on every dollar, but the long term as far as what kind of a city that we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't see any questions in the queue, so would the next person please come forward?
Hello, I'm Sally Speaker. I have a couple of sentences. Picture a tree-lined street with playing children, infants in strollers, walkers and runners, 80-something or older even, cyclists, owners walking their pets that are fit, and close to public transit. Now picture cars on the Seward Highway speeding through the intersections, having their cell phones up to their ears so they can be distracted. The sidewalks are icy and worse, they're broken up by parking lots with no sidewalks. That's my walk every morning here in Midtown Anchorage. What would we want to choose? Would we want to choose a place where we can walk, we can be healthy, we can put that into our daily routine, we can save money, we can have less pollution? And how much does it really cost when we're thinking about decades versus days or hours? Anyway, I would like my whole walk to be more like my first part of my walk, and I'd like to be able to see pets and children and people not being afraid for their lives. Thanks.
Thank you for your testimony. May we have your last name, please? Yeah. Would the next person please come forward?
How are you all doing? My name is Al Robinson. I'm a truck driver with 30 years experience. On page 13 and on page 14 of the pamphlet, which I found out in the hallway, it talks about connexes. Now, I'm one of the only people in town that moves these critters, loaded. I've been working for Container Specialties of Alaska now for the last 7 years. I ask that in writing this, would you please consult somebody who knows about these units as far as transporting them, putting a roof on them for aesthetic purposes. Around Anchorage, Eagle River, Wasilla, Palmer, many times people's homes get damaged. They ask us to drop off connexes for the ability to place the items from the house into connexes for the repair, and the stuff goes back in the homes. Businesses ask for the same thing. Construction sites daily We've got connexes all over Alaska for this construction to be accomplished. You can't put brick around these things. You can make it a little fence, but no, you can't get to them. You need room to maneuver. It's okay to write things on a piece of paper and sit in an office to do so, but you need to consult people who actually get on the ground, people who live around these things. Not everything's pretty. Not everything's going to be pretty. This is Alaska. This is life. We have to make choices in which that can accommodate what's required to do. Okay, that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, sir. May we have the next person?
Good evening. My name is David Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E. And I just kind of had a flashback while I'm sitting here listening to all these previous speakers. Oh, I'm sorry, Chairman Yoshimura, fellow commissioners. And I'm thinking, what would our founding fathers say? Franklin, Washington, Jefferson, etc. It's like, here we are discussing, what can I do with my property? I think they'd be, I don't know whose side they'd be on. I would hope they'd be on mine. Anyway, a little bit of background. My wife and I have 46 years of combined military service. I've lived in 10 states. And I also lived in Portland, Oregon, a town of great smart growth. But I lived there before they instituted smart growth. And it was a very nice city. I've never lived on base, except once when we were required to because of our positions. And you know why I didn't live on base? There were too many rules. If you didn't cut your grass, it got a little bit too long, you got a base citation and reported to your commander. If you didn't rake your leaves, you got a citation from the base commander and went to your supervisor. That's what I see here in the overreaching aspect of Title 21. You had limits on the amount of flowers you could put in, the amount of shrubs. You couldn't have a garden in your yard. That was prohibited. But what's really ironic is what happened on the base in those days. They're privatizing housing now, so it looks different. In the old days, you had to actually look at the number on your house to make sure you were at the right front door. Now I see what's happening outside the perimeter of the base, the fact that we're turning into government housing. And I don't like government housing. Anchorage is probably the nicest place I have ever lived in all 10 states that I've been stationed in. And I like it because it grew up the way it is today. If we had Title 21 in 1954, I guarantee you we'd all live within 3 blocks of Ship Creek. And we'd probably live in high-rises, 10 and 20 stories high. There'd be one paved street. There'd be a multitude of trails. So you could go visit the Chugach and Bicentennial Park. There'd be one parking place and 3 cars. That's what Title 21 does. It's overreaching. It dictates to me, my family, and the rest of the citizens of Anchorage what they can and cannot do with their property. I do not tell the municipality what it can do with its property. So I'm totally against Title 21, as you can gather. First of all, affordable housing. It increases the price of housing overall. The lower income people in this community live in pretty much slum housing. The best thing that happened to Title 21 is the Connect Arm Bridge will be built.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Migrate. Thank you.
Thank you. Will the next person please come forward?
Good evening. I'm Chuck Killeen, K-I-L-L-E-E-N. I'm a resident of East Anchorage. Thank you, Madam Chairman, Commission members. Very quickly, 4 documents to consider when you're looking at the Title 21 rewrite. The Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, Anchorage 2020 Plan, and Agenda 21 from the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Will the next person please come forward? It's perfectly all right to get in line. So, thank you. It helps the process speed along. All right.
Madam Chair, my name is Mark Fish. I'm a former Community Council President of Airport Heights Community Council. I served as their delegate on the Federation of Community Councils, and I am now a resident of Big Lake, Alaska. I would like to speak to this 2020 plan that we've heard tonight that many people insist that you must follow because it went through a lengthy process and people have had a chance to input. I know how this community involvement process has worked in my neighborhoods and my council district. And the fact of the matter is, it's a small but vocal minority that wants to impose their will on someone else. The trouble that I had in generating interest in my community to come to these meetings and express their will is most people want to live their lives as they see fit, defending their own property and their own liberty. And I think that's the essence of what we're talking about in government. You know, the essence of government is to protect a person's life, liberty, and their property from incursion on others. So I would like you to keep that in mind when you're making your decision. Does your decision protect a person's right to their property? Does it protect the right to their liberty? Another thing about this plan also is, you know, there's a lot of talk about midtowns and congestion and cars and whatnot, but you got to remember that Anchorage is a south central city. I've lived in it for 45 years of my 55 years, and the fact is the surrounding communities depend on Anchorage. And there's a lot of traffic in here that is not from Anchorage, you know. So if you make these restrictive changes, as some of these provisions are, on automobile traffic in lieu of the neighborhood, you're going to lose commerce. And I, as a recent member of Big Lake, don't want to see that. It says my quality of life actually improved when I left Airport Heights. I say that unfortunately, because, you know, the cost prohibitive as it is of a retired NCO living in Airport Heights was too expensive. I moved from my 50-year-old house to a brand new one out there, wiped out my debt, and I'm living a better life because of it. And if you pass these kind of measures, you're only going to add to that cost and chasing more people like myself on fixed incomes elsewhere, losing their institutional knowledge of the city that they grew up in. So I think it's very important for you to consider these changes, and I would stand in opposition to the change of the rewrite simply because it adds to the volume and confusion. You know, if you look at the original plan, it's short. This one's huge. And city planners can find work in the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for still caring about Anchorage. Please come forward.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to testify tonight, and thank you for your service. Appreciate your commitment to the public. I'm Chris Terlides. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Facilities at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and I'm here tonight to talk mainly about the Title 21 Institutional Master Plan, so a very small segment of Title 21. I do have to say I agree with Terry Schoenthal when he spoke earlier about that Title 21 is overly arduous, my words, and that every word counts or costs. I think it costs, and our designers trying to comply with it costs in review, both by the municipality, our designers, and our staff, and it costs in construction. Anyway, I'm here again to talk about Title 21 Institutional Master Plan. We have a campus. University of Alaska is a campus. We have a requirement to develop a master plan for the Regents. I think it'd be very efficient if our master plan that we periodically revise and get approved through the Regents could be served as the institutional master plan for the MOA. I think the purpose of the plans are similar. I think the requirements are similar. I got to say that the level of detail expected by the MOA is arduous and extreme. I have some specific wordsmithing or word recommendations in this document that I have submitted, so I won't go through it all, but I will just talk about a couple of pieces of it. The master plan, talks about any site that has multiple building sites and 25 contiguous acres of property. Later in that plan, it says all areas that are under the ownership and control of the institution. So we have acreage that are bisected by Elmore and bisected by Providence Drive. So is that contiguous? It's property that we own, all of our property that we own that's almost contiguous, but there's, something that goes between it. So again, I think that goes back to the arduous. The notion is, tell us what you own, how you're going to manage it and plan it, and the contiguous just makes it a little bit harder and to explain exactly what where the boundaries are and what the rules that apply are. A little bit later on, it talks about tell us your mission, how many buildings, how many acres, all that's fine. And then there's a segment in there that says, and what are the maximum number of people present on site for any single activity? And again, that strikes me a little bit as an odd requirement for a large master plan. Is it realistic for a 10 or 20 year plan that you have that kind of numbers or estimates in there? And it's not clear what that purpose is.
Sorry, we have a question in the queue. Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, I was wondering if you have your comments in writing that you've submitted to the planning department?
Yeah, I have them in writing, thank you, and I submitted them this evening to the planning department, so they will show up, I guess, tomorrow or at some point. Thank you.
Just hang in there. Commissioner Phelps?
So have you had a chance to compare the existing Title 21 with the proposed Title 21 for a master plan?
So the short answer is yes. How do I like the comparisons? I guess, again, I think the proposed plan is a little arduous and a little overreaching. I think the notion of a plan is good. I think the notion that if we submit an institutional master plan, that every project doesn't necessarily have to go through the public process. I think that's saves all of us time and energy. This plan says, with the exception of projects that are a little bit bigger than this and that, and show you the benefit of the institutional master plan kind of gets negated by all of the stipulations and details required.
I must admit that I haven't looked at the requirement for a master plan, institutional master plan recently, but my understanding is similar to yours, which is the existing Title 21 provides for a institutional master plan wherein the institutions will work to develop a particular approach like an APU. It's going to be a master plan for their particular area. That's adopted, and that becomes the basis for the review of development proposals that come in and list to this commission. And it seems like a reasonably well-working process. So, I mean, I guess, does that process that we have right now work for you?
So we have not submitted a master plan under, we've had a master plan for 20 years, or a variety of master plans. We haven't submitted one under the institutional master plan. We intend to on the next rewrite, which starts in a year or so. But again, the proposed Title 21 for this is a little overreaching, more overreaching than I think it previously was.
So the way I'm getting this is that the concept of the institutional master plan is appropriate, and you would support that.
Yes.
And the way I described it, which is you have the opportunity of submitting a particular approach to the municipality and the city reviewing that and then adopting that and maybe changing it too. That all seems to work. What you're concerned about is not with the concept, but rather with the specifics in Title 21.
Exactly.
Is that
Level
right?
of detail that the muni says needs to be in the master plan.
Okay. And so in your correspondence to us, did you actually identify changes?
I did.
Okay. And we have that correspondence.
You will have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again for your service.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Will the next person please come forward?
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to testify tonight. My name is Nordica Frederick. It's Nordicafriedrich. And I'm a lifelong Alaskan. I was born in Anchorage 27 years ago, and I spent half my life between Fairbanks, Anchorage, Kenai, and Valdez, and I lived 10 years in Seattle, Washington as well. In Seattle, Washington, I lived in a neighborhood called Roosevelt, which was in the north side of town, and I attended school on the south side of town. Both the neighborhood I lived in Seattle, and the neighborhood I attended school in were pilot tests in 1999 and 2000. We were pilot tests for community development, transit-related development, and at the time I was a teenager. And what we discovered was that we were members of an illegal human subjects research pilot test, testing innovative militarized policing strategies on members of the community that had been identified by other members of the community as unwanteds, transients, and there were a multitude of programs overlaid on top of each other in Seattle, implementing neighborhood plans, which were following the mandates for sustainable development handed down by a local Agenda 21 at the United Nations in 1992. The same things have come to fruition in Alaska. I moved back here 7 years ago and discovered the Anchorage 2020 plan, which follows the mandates for sustainable development worldwide, and the implementation of Anchorage 2020, manifested by the Title 21 rewrites, will absolutely classify everyone in Anchorage and the Anchorage Bowl as assets to be developed with or without their consent. And I believe that the understanding of Anchorage residents is that, yes, our city is not perfect. It is not walkable. I walked and bused to work for years in Anchorage before I acquired 3 vehicles. And now I commute to Anchorage, where I own a publishing company, and I live in the Valley. And I believe that the designation of Anchorage as a model northern sustainable city is unfair because the Alaskans in general are an extremely auto-dependent people. I was raised in Fairbanks and taught to keep a rig running at 60 below because otherwise my family would perish on many of the desolate roads that we lived and worked on. At this point, the concern that I think the people of Anchorage have is that, yes, we want to be healthier and we want it to be prettier, but to disregard the value that auto-dependent businesses have in the community, and to say that just because to be healthier and greener, we should be allowed access to trails. The overall land use intent of Anchorage 2020 is to create an environment in which the people of Anchorage have an opportunity to live less auto-dependent lifestyles, and that's perfectly fair. I bused and walked and skateboarded for 10 years in Seattle, massive urban sprawl, and a very admirable public transportation system.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Will the next person please come forward?
I'm Dean Camry. I live up on the hillside. I've been in Anchorage for over 20 years. I'm a fat old white guy. I like to drive my truck around when I go doing my errands in Midtown, downtown, or out at the Diamond Center. I like to sit on my deck and listen to the birds. I like to chase the bears away when they get too close to my house. The house I live in was built in 1977. If it were to be judged by anybody today, based on today's code, it would fail on every aspect. When Janice Schamberg had her tree cutting ordinance, I knew I was in really deep doo-doo because I couldn't trim my bushes anymore. Thank goodness that failed. Now we're here talking about Title 21 that's been going on for a good 10 years. In the beginning, contractor input was requested through the AGC and the ABC and other organizations. In the stages that have been adopted, most of their recommendations have not been included. All I have been hearing about, except with one exception in the testimony, is added costs that come from the regulations. And the two go hand in hand. As the regulations go up, the costs go up. Not a good reason to adopt Title 21. Also, you folks, as part of the government, I'm relying on you to protect my rights. Title 21 does not do anything to protect my property rights. And I'm currently in a situation where the last windstorm blew down a whole bunch of my fence. My question for you is, if we had Title 21 in place today, how many permits, how many plan reviews, and what would it take for me to put my fence back up once the snow melts? I've seen the changes in the building codes. One example is in footings and foundations that always used to be at the frost line at 4 feet. Someone in their infinite wisdom in the municipality decided if 4 feet is good, 6 feet is better, and that's 50% more cost for pouring a drilled pier concrete foundation. I urge you to totally get rid of all of Title 21 changes.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Would the next person please come forward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Mark Rowley. I work for a commercial property management company. I have for the last 30 years, managing properties. Many of them are right here in this neighborhood, right here in this area. So I'm part of the evil cabal that's out to make our city nasty and dirty. Just kidding, I'm not part of the cabal. But I like the bike trails. I use them all the time. I have for the last 30 years. I run on them. I bike on them. I got to try out one of those new big fat tire winter bikes this weekend, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get one of those. I'm a baseball coach. I've been a youth sports baseball coach for 13 years now. I believe in physical fitness. I believe in a healthy lifestyle, an active lifestyle. I think our community should do more to promote those things, especially amongst the kids. But with all that being said, I can't support Title 21 as this is presently being presented to you guys. I also appreciate volunteerism. I have regret and some guilt that I didn't do more to participate in the process to bring this before you, but I didn't, and that's my testimony.
I don't see any questions in the queue, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Cheryl Richardson, and appreciate your sticking this out tonight. I grew up here in Anchorage. I won't admit how many years ago, but I remember very distinctly that we walked everywhere as kids. There was usually only one car per household, if that, in those days, and we walked moose trails, typically, to go to Goose Lake or Ship Creek for ice skating when it was still cold in the winter, downtown for tennis. We did real well. There were fewer cars and it was safer to walk. I was active in the community council system since Laney Fleischer brought it to town in the 1970s. And I've noticed over the testimony over all the years, community councils want Anchorage to become a better place to live in all the ways that you've heard about tonight and all the ways that are captured in Anchorage 2020. Thousands of people put that plan together. So it's very hard to walk away from it, and I urge you to meet your obligations to implement that adopted plan. I've also attended way too many of the assemblies, Title 21 Assembly, Title 21 committee meetings, and watched many, many compromises come down the pike at those meetings. Their developers were there with very strong and effective voices that caused compromise over a number of, I've got a long list here. We started off with public open space, and that was taken away entirely in 2004. Now, private open space in development is being restricted, capped with the mayor's amendments at 2,000 square feet, from a 30% of development down to, again, 2,000 square feet, no matter what the size of the development. Sunshine standards were never really taken on, were never really engaged heavily, but there were a few little tweaks. We had a transition standard that's about to be wiped out, and then the B3 height limitations in Midtown are in question again. The Midtown plan, it's very unfortunate that it was abandoned. It's my understanding it was abandoned because it was underfunded, and there was inadequate participation from both the business community and the public. So it needs to be picked up back again. The housing study that you just had presented was very interesting, and I'm anxious to go ahead and read more about it. But I think it does point out that we will be going into compact housing in the future, and make that work so that we don't pollute the city anymore. We need to start partnering with biking, walking, and transit. We don't do that in this town.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I don't see anyone in the queue, and thank you for all the service work that you did. May we have the next person, please?
Hi, my name's Catherine Hicks, and I am against Title 21 or any version of Title 21 because I am against the UN controlling our lives. Agenda 21 is non-binding and depends entirely on national, state, and local governments for implementation. We cannot comply with any UN mandate on our property rights. What this and 2020 comprehensive plan is anti-private property. Title 21, or smart growth, will lead to significantly higher home prices, expansion of the role of government plays in our economic decision making, and it will impede development and economic growth, and a vast undermining of the individual choice and property rights. Senator Rand Paul has introduced SB 212, Defensive Environment and Property Act. I believe this bill was written in defiance of Title 21 and Agenda 21 and will curb the extreme overreach of the EPA. Rejecting Title 21 and the 2020 Comprehensive Plan will be our first step in overthrowing the assault on our God-given property rights. The user's guide in Title 21 sounds like Obamacare. We won't know what's in it until it's passed. The unelected folks need to decide. We are allowing the unelected folks to decide our case. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Will the next person please come forward?
Hello, my name is Lainey Fleischer, and the last name is spelled F as in Frank, F-L-E-I-S as in Sam, C-H-E-R. And I thank you very much for hearing the testimony. I wanted to say, first of all, I'm here to support Title 21 as provisionally adopted. I was not as involved as a lot of people were in Title 21, but I kept an eye on it all along because in 1973, I was involved with the goals and objectives for the comprehensive plan that was developed and adopted in 1976. And this started under the borough. And it took 4 years to get it adopted. And these goals and objectives were hammered out week after week by a huge group of citizens, and we held neighborhood meetings in 11 different communities and heard people's dreams for their hometown. And I don't remember hearing one negative comment on these goals, and some of them are very familiar. Anchorage 2020 is actually a very worthy successor for the plan that we adopted in '76. The primary goal, if a bit quaint, was said to create a way of life for the highest possible quality based upon planning for an optimum population and consistent with ecological principles. But out of that plan, it was far from a plan that sat on a shelf, because out of that plan came unification, community councils, and I did organize the first ones, but it was because of all the citizens who said they wanted community councils. And of course, a comprehensive trail plan with pedestrian amenities, which was well supported in all of those neighborhood meetings. Standards for setbacks and landscaping. One of the things that the original plan called for was for parkland acquisition, because it was determined that we weren't up to speed nationally with how much parkland we had. So we embarked on a program of parkland acquisition, which resulted in the green belts that we have now, including Chester Creek. We had to buy a number of parcels to complete the Chester Creek green belt. My main point is that people's dreams for a livable community have not diminished. If anything, they have become stronger and more informed. Residential design standards are important because what my neighbor does with his property does affect me and my property. And this is true for all of us. We're all in this together.
I have to thank you for your testimony. And there are no questions in the queue. Will the next person please come forward?
Can I approach?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'd like to just say, God bless Lainey Fleischer. I second everything that she said. I think I'm in the minority up here today, but I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Matt Johnson. I've been an Anchorage resident for more than 50 years. My grandparents, Earl and Mary Jane Hillstrand, homesteaded in Anchorage in the 40s. The old homestead was bounded by Chester Creek in the south and what is now Lake Otis Parkway, 15th and Gamble. My family still owns a piece of the homestead. My wife and I are raising our 3 kids in the same vicinity. This is our home. I love Anchorage, and I want to see the community thrive for myself and especially for my kids. That's why I'm deeply concerned by what appear to be attempts by a very small number of wealthy developers, Tea Party activists, to hijack Title 21. As you know, the provisionally adopted version of Title 21 was hammered out over the course of 8 or 9 years by a committed group of Anchorage residents from all sides of the political spectrum. It is not a perfect document, but it did represent a consensus and a compromise acceptable to all participants moving forward. Dan Coffey himself voted in favor of approving that version of the Title 21 when it came before the Assembly. So what happened? Politics happened. Polarizing politics, paralyzing politics. We see it on the national scale, and we see it now locally as well. I don't think that we as a community should be playing politics with our kids' futures, and that is exactly what's at stake, our kids' futures. I've been listening closely to the arguments of opponents to Title 21 here in these chambers last Monday and today, and recently at a Tea Party-sponsored forum across the lobby, among other venues. Some of what I hear I can agree with. For example, I agree we should resolve the issues regarding industrial land at the southern end of the C Street corridor. Nobody wants to see a property radically devalued over a technicality. Identify the problem, isolate it, and fix it. That said, most arguments I hear from the developer Tea Party lobby are frankly ridiculous. Here are a few of my favorites. Title 21 lets government choose winners and losers. Well, I don't want BOMA picking winners and losers in my community. We are opposed to centralized planning, Stalin style. The alternative is no planning at all, every man for himself. That's not a community. The word community doesn't appear in the Constitution. You have no right to a community. That's precisely the type of thinking that makes Title 21 necessary. Title 21 is a violation of my property rights. What about my property rights? What happens to the value of my investment when a high-rise blocks the sun in my neighborhood on the north side of Fireweed Lane? And finally, it's too expensive. I believe the jury is still out on the expense issue. I've heard both that it will add costs and that it will reduce costs. In my experience, the most expensive action one can take is to not adequately plan for the future. So what's the way forward? One of you commissioners posed the question last week, how does one successfully navigate the complexities of the code and make responsible decisions regarding modifications, if any? I suggest two principles. One, put neighborhoods and families first.
I'm going to have to ask you to
and two, move
stop
Anchorage forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. There were no questions in the queue. Would the next person please come forward?
Good evening. My name is Steve Aufrecht, A-U-F-R-E-C-H-T. And I know you have a generally thankless task, so let me just thank you for your service to the board and to the community. Since I only have 3 minutes, let me just talk quickly 3 points on costs. The first, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. That was a air filter ad that I think still makes sense. Often scrimping now leads to much higher costs in the future. This is my 35th year in Anchorage. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was recently down there for my mother's 90th birthday. The traffic is awful. Things that took 10 minutes to get to now take 45 minutes to get to. In the 50s and 60s, they ripped out the trolley lines and built freeways. Today, those freeways are getting clogged. Every time I go down to visit my mother, they're building another lane on the freeway. But they're also now going back, buying up those trolley rights, building subways, they're building light rail, trying to deal with all the congestion. We can learn from LA. What may seem expensive today in the future looks like a real bargain often. Number two, don't take anyone's testimony at face value. Ask for numbers, look at those numbers carefully, see what they mean. And third, listen to those with experience. They can tell you how the regulations are going to practically have to be implemented. But don't let them just say, so don't do them. Ask them, how would you change those regulations so you can get to the goals of 2020? I challenge you to listen to people's dreams and to their concerns, but also to look at the details so that we can get those dreams through. Imagine an Anchorage as beautiful as the environment that surrounds it. And when all this is over, don't worry about what any of us who testify think about you personally. I want you to think about your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren listening to the tapes of your discussion. And I hope you make decisions that they can be proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Would the next person please come forward?
Hello, I'm Billy Ray Powers, P-O-W-E-R-S. Over half a century in Anchorage. What I have here is I've been jumping back and forth between the volume in the white binder and my old copy here that I got when I was taking my real estate broker's test in 1984. This code, it really does have a lot of problems in it. It basically snout-nosed and cookie-cutter row condoed us here for about 20 years. I know that the new Title 21 and all the amendments are an effort to change that, to make it nicer. And though I applaud, and believe me, I do applaud each and every one of you for spending the kind of time that you've spent on this. I know you spent arduous nights. I attended one in December here where we looked at, we were looking at going through this page by page. I believe I was here 2 hours. We got to page 8. and there was no common consensus on any page. That's when I left the meeting. But this goes beyond that. This is the biggest takeover of private property that's ever come to Anchorage. This is what people have spent their lives investing in, and this is a takeover of it. I'm not happy with the takeover of the taxes have caused in this area, but we can change that. I'm definitely not happy with 600 pages of can't do's on property. Without respect, without even consideration to really professional people like engineers, architects, that could design based on each individual property something that's very nice, but maybe not in compliance with all the drop-down menus. The houses, arguably, that were built here before even this are really the nicest neighborhoods. Take, 3rd Edition, Rogers Park, Airport Heights. Before we had this ominous bunch of laws, expensive to comply with laws, the housing was much nicer. Arguably, there are some houses that aren't so nice, but by and large, the houses that have either were different, every lot was different.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't see any questions in the queue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would the next person please come forward?
Mark
How
Butler.
many are there of you that are still here to testify? Could you please raise your hand? All right, thank you very much. If you would come forward and get in line, that would be most helpful to the commission. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. No cheering or anything, or whistling, please. Mark Butler, B-U-T-L-E-R. I live in the North Star neighborhood, which is the little valley between downtown and midtown. So I think the question tonight that many people have said is whether they want Title 21 or not. I think that's really a wrong question. The wrong question is, do you want zoning or not? So I want zoning because I want zoning to protect my private property rights as a landowner in Anchorage. And it's my understanding that state law says if there's zoning by any municipality, then there must be a comprehensive plan, and land use regulations, which means Title 21, must follow the comprehensive plan. So I think the Title 21 or no Title 21 should really be restructured to whether you want zoning or you don't want zoning. I do because I want protection. Been here 38 years, pre-pipeline, pre-merger of the city, like all of us if we're giving our chops. Winners and losers, I'm worried about high-rise buildings blocking my winter light. Simple as that. We live in the little valley, so we don't have a lot of it. We're not the more well-to-do people on top of the hills on either side, but Valley of the Moon Park down in that area, we're worried that on the north side of Fireweed Lane, the south side of Fireweed Lane, there'll be very, very tall high-rises, and they will shade our neighborhood. So we're very worried about that. Those are our private property rights, and we're hoping that you as a body will consider that when you look at that tonight. And thank you.
Just 1 minute.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question or two. Could you tell me how many community councils there are? And could you tell me what the average attendance is, if you have? And could you explain how the community councils are funded as well? I think that'd be important background information for this commission.
Okay, I am also employed by the community councils, so I think that's why she's asking the question, not as a non-employee.
That's correct.
Thank you, ma'am. So we have 38 community councils within. They're developed by statute by our elected officials, and we have about 12 community patrols, which are not set up by statute. The Federation of Community Councils is the governing body over the community patrols. Over the community councils. Many people, Mr. Fish and others here, have been officers of those. Matt Johnson and so forth, John Weddleton and so forth. forth. And so they generally represent the community, a more conservative part that tends to have more conservative people on the boards of their council and so forth. It is funded, our community council center that I run as manager is funded by a small grant from the city of Anchorage municipality. This year it was $80,000. It's gone down from a couple $100,000, and we've been very efficient with our monies, and we're still getting a big bang for that. And we assist community councils in doing their job. We don't regulate them, but we assist them only with websites and emails and Facebook pages and whatever they can do to help get the community involved. Your question about how many people come to an average meeting, many councils, it varies, and it varies depending on what the issues are. So if, the average council has between I'd say 300 to 500 or 600 people on their mailing list, whether it's U.S. Postal Service mailing lists, or those are getting smaller to save money, or email mailing lists, and many of you are on those lists. So about 500 or 600 people are involved. However, how many people actually come out to an actual meeting? I'd say from 10 to 40 probably is the average. Really depends. Mine and North Star is a very small physically, and number of population is very small, and we average about 20 to 25. However, if there's an issue that's of importance to an average person, then we can have upwards to 200 or 300 people at a community council meeting. So we consider that the root of democracy in Anchorage, is what the founders of our merged municipality said. And so just because there may not be a lot of people there doesn't mean that they're not very involved in listening and very through the different mechanisms.
We do have a question from Commissioner Pruse.
Thank you, Chair.
Excuse me. Thank you.
You mentioned you were in favor of zoning, and before us we have some issues about actually changing zoning of existing properties and property owners that have either purchased or have their property zoned under one as existed today, but may be changed, which may affect the economic value of that property. I'd like to hear your opinion of that.
I don't have a clear opinion on that. I think I understand the property rights of a developer who has a property. There are many undeveloped properties in my instance right on the south side of Fireweed Lane. So I understand that. However, I also have property rights in the area. Mine aren't as big because I have a smaller home, a smaller investment than many of them do. So I don't know. I'm not suggesting one route or another, but I'm just suggesting that in this northern city that we live in, so to speak, my property values can be greatly diminished by someone building a very, very large building on the south side of me, and that's my concern. I don't know how to deal with that. I'm not a property expert like you are, and I hope you do well tonight and in the considerations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Will the next person please come forward?
Good evening. My name is Robert Shipley. I'm representing the Anchorage Waterways Council this evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. We generally support the department staff recommendations on this Title 21 rewrite, and I'm specifically referring to the section 21.07.020, which is primarily has to do with the natural environment. And even more specifically than that, because of the Waterways Council long-standing interest in the Anchorage area is the creeks and the wetlands and the lakes and the entire watershed. And of course with the associated uplands or riparian zones which protect the creeks and lakes. And most scientists believe that these riparian areas are very important in the biological health of the creeks and rivers, provide protection, filtration, shade, habitat for animals and so forth, and birds. So we'd like to see the setback, the creek setback for development standards kept at the 50 feet minimum, rather than the some indication, some people want it down to 25 feet. We just don't think that's enough to provide this adequate natural biological protection of the rivers. And more specifically in one paragraph, B6, small b, double I, parenthesis D, that there was a new proposal to permit things like fences and patios in the setback area. Not construction, just maybe even parking zones or driveways. But this, in turn, in our view, would disrupt this protection zone of vegetation that helps maintain the health of the streams throughout the watershed. And by vegetation, we're not referring to lawn or grass. This is a no-no. A lot of the old parts of the city have people's backyards right up to the creeks, and that wouldn't be legal nowadays. And the reason it's not good is it's one species of vegetation. It's not a complex vegetated area. And also, people are inclined to use fertilizers and pesticides on their lawn to keep them nice. All that runs right into the creeks. It's very detrimental to the aquatic organisms, including salmon and mayflies and so on and so forth. And it's very hard to enforce what someone does without their lawn right down to the water's edge. And even to the point of surreptitiously dumping lawn clippings in the creeks. We've seen a lot of that, and that adds to the biochemical oxygen demand and all other negative things. So all in all, we support some of these changes to this specific section of the Title 21. Thank you.
We have some questions in the queue, so if you just stay put with us. Commissioner Phelps?
Yes, you had mentioned a particular citation in code. Could you repeat that again for me, because I missed it?
It's 21.07.020.
Is that the setback provision, or?
Primarily, but it addresses certain situations that are permitted through permitting, special conditions, emergencies, construction, flood. It's quite detailed. And I'm just addressing mostly, I guess, the biological aspect, because that's what I'm most familiar with.
Yeah, that's what I was getting from your testimony, is that you're really talking to the value of a riparian area and the function of a riparian area. Okay, thank you.
And if I may add to that, that may be our particular specific interest, but the entire community benefits from having healthy creeks and healthy green belts for the children to play and explore and get educated about the natural environment. I've taken a lot of creek walks with the members of the public over the years as educational situations, and to teach them the value of the creeks in our community.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes, through the chair. Question is, tonight we've heard some presentation on the shortage of land available for residential use, and the needs of our communities for residents in the future is growing faster than what is estimated to be the available land supply. Given this situation and the importance of accommodating residential needs in the community, how do we balance that against your concerns for biological protection of the creeks?
It's a very good question, and it is a coming concern, and perhaps could be viewed as conflict not just in Anchorage, but nationwide. Population grows, demands grow, and so you have to start making priorities, I think. In my mind, that 50 feet isn't going to maybe be that significant. On the other hand, if it gets eaten into, so to speak, because of the demands for more property, and it gets down to maybe 25 feet, and then 20 feet, and then 10 feet, because the arguments continue as the population grows and the demand grows. Pretty soon you have no protection. Then the creeks can start deteriorating, and what was once a valuable community asset, for example, Little Campbell Creek runs through the south part of town and crosses the old Seward Highway eventually. In a lot of areas of it, the old, I guess, lack of zoning or other requirements permitted developments, including truck yards and junk yards and all kinds of industrial, right down to the creek banks. Plus, it was channelized just because it was more convenient than leave it in its natural meanders. And now, a lot of Little Campbell Creek looks like a drainage ditch, even though it's a natural creek. And if that the pressure continues and those decisions in the future are made to decrease that setback protection, I foresee a lot of, like Campbell, the main Campbell Creek, which is a beautiful natural stream most of the way, becomes to a ditch because of all these influences from out-of-control uses of adjacent properties.
Would one of the solutions to that be acquisition by the public, government involved, so that the private landowner wouldn't bear the brunt of it?
The Campbell Creek Greenbelt, I think, was one of those examples many, many years ago. Chester Creek Greenbelt. Laney could tell you more about that. That's an example of the...
So that has been a pattern, a tradition in this community.
But as expressed a lot directly or indirectly tonight, there's a lot of people view that as government involvement and private taking of private property, and I don't know. It's controversial, but it definitely would work for our benefits.
We have to balance it. That's the problem.
Good luck.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you give me your definition of a stream in terms of width or flow? All streams are can be as large as Campbell Creek. Streams can be much smaller. Streams could be intermittent, and so do you think that all streams, regardless of size, should have the 50-foot setback requirement?
I think if it's it runs continually year-round.
Okay.
As far as size, I hesitate to put exactly like 2 feet wide, 4 feet, 10 feet. It's because even our smallest creeks, like the forks of Little Campbell Creek, we can go down there and collect numerous aquatic insects that are indicators of prime water quality, like mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. These in turn support any fish in there, like trout and salmon. So there's a whole complex ecosystem, even in these smallest, narrowest freshwater creeks that are now intermittent streams, like when it's just a huge rainstorm or during breakup runoff. That's a little more questionable, and I think that's addressed to some extent in the revisions. Mm-hmm. I can't quote you on it, or quote it, but it's termed more of a drainage way by their definite terminology. So I can't give you a very exact answer, just generally, I guess.
But from your experience and knowledge, you would say that a stream could be defined as something that runs continually all year round?
Yeah, and sometimes, like even Ship Creek, as big as it is in midsummer, in winter, when there's no surface water input, all you get is a little bit of groundwater because Anchorage is underlain by porous gravel. And sometimes that river water is running into the aquifer rather than coming from the aquifer into the river. And so there's sections of Ship Creek that are almost dry in the winter. But that said, most of the creeks that we're familiar with, Campbell and Ship and so forth, are, I guess, viable streams.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would the next person please come forward?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Tom Dreher, and I'm with S4 Group. I'm a planner, land surveyor. In the last 30 years, I've designed thousands of residential lots and condominiums for different developers around town. And there's a good chance some of you guys live in subdivisions that I designed. So I'm the guy in the trench that has to take all these regulations and actually put them to paper. For tonight, there's just 5 issues, very distinct issues I'd like to address. And the first one is a stream protection setback. The current Title 21, of course, is 25 feet on either side, and the new title is recommending 50 feet on either side. The problem is that we've designed lots out there that were designed considering the 25-foot setback, and if you change it to 50, a lot of building sites can be impacted. So I guess one compromise would be to keep it the 25-foot setback for all the existing lots that have been designed and platted. Item number 2, there's a couple little things requiring type 1 curb and gutter. It's on your page 425 of the new packet of Title 21. And type 1 curb and gutter is the kind that's just straight, and then it has the gutter there. And so for a builder to come in, then he would have to actually get out a concrete saw and cut out for the driveway. It just doesn't make any sense, and it adds expense to the development, maybe $1,000 or so, or $1,500 maybe. But then, as we all know, any cost that the developer has, it's a multiple of 4 by the time it gets to the cost of the house. That code actually shows up in 2 different places requiring type 1 curb and gutter. It's on page 425 of the new packet and page 439 of the new packet. And I have all the stuff written out, and I'll submit it to the planning, but I had a plotter glitch tonight, so I don't have the pretty copy to hand out. Item number 3 on page 395 and in the insert on page 18, it's requiring all developments of 16 units and over to go to the P&Z Commission. The existing code is no public hearing. So say if you had a 4-building development of 4-plexes, it would have to go to the P&Z, the UDC, so you'd be adding about another 4 to 12 months or so onto the site plan approval process, with really no community gains. One big one is on page 382 of the new Title 21 packet, requiring 25-foot spacing between multi-family buildings. Currently it's 10 feet, and it wants to increase it to a minimum of 25 feet. And what that actually does is it decreases the number of lots and increases the cost by a factor of 20%. So say if you have 100...
Just hang in there. We have some questions. Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, I'd like to hear Mr. Dreyer continue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. What that does is it increases the cost by 20%. So say if you're in an area where you could get 5 lots, now you can only get 4 lots, 4 buildings. And if say the average lot's $100,000, that's going to add $20,000 onto the development of that lot, and then taking the factor of 4 between the land and the finished house, that means a $400,000 house now costs $480,000, which is a substantial amount. On page 382, it's a continuation of that same issue. It's the next code down, and it states 1 foot distance for every foot of building height. So if you have a building height that's, say, 35 feet, which is common in multifamily, or you could actually have 35 feet required distance between the buildings, which would increase the cost even more than the 20%. It'd be more like about 25 to 30% extra cost. And this is only a partial list, and I'll be typing this up for you guys later.
Are there any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Phelps?
Actually, I do have questions for you, but I guess on your last comment is the germane one, which is you're going to write this down, correct,
yes,
and give it to us?
Yeah.
And you're going to give us this very specific recommendations that you would propose to make, correct?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission when we had quite a discussion about the number of condominium units that could be built on a single track without requiring any sort of public hearing. And I'm just wondering if you could elaborate about the pros and cons. You know, we had a tremendous amount of condominium development on one track. And like you say, you've been in the trenches. I've been in the trenches. But it seems to me that from a good public policy position that the community should have an opportunity to have input in a 90-unit, say a 90-unit single-track development. They don't currently have that opportunity through community councils or any sort of community meeting. versus if you were going to plat a 6-lot subdivision, for example, you would have to have a public process. So where do you stand on all of that, Mr. Dreyer?
Well, I guess it's where you draw the line. Is 16 units the correct place to draw that line? I don't know. 16 units definitely seems a bit small, because that'd just be fourplexes, say, on a single tract. And
You have a number?
I don't have an exact number, no. I haven't looked at that particular aspect of the issue that much.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you mentioned the 16 units, and that's
Correct.
why
Yeah.
I wanted to extend the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, fourplexes, maybe when you get up into the 8, I'm not exactly sure where you cut that line off.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nathan Bosch, B-O-S-C-H. I'm a student at Alaska Pacific University pursuing a master's degree in environmental science with a particular focus on water resources. Tonight I wanted to speak to the setback regulations in Title 21 in Section 21.07020. As was mentioned before, they are biologically significant, maintaining adequate setbacks. The recommended 50 feet, in my opinion, would be a bare minimum. The proposal of 25 would be a disturbing proposition from my perspective. I anticipate this year seeing significant flooding around the Anchorage area, and I think there's quite a few people who are very concerned about that. And stream setbacks are a significant component of managing flooding and runoff within a city and within a community. We already see places around town, Valley of the Moon, Campbell Creek on Tudor Road near Lake Otis, where homes and developments experience flooding in what we could call an average year. Frankly, I'm a little nervous to see how it goes this year. Stream buffers, by maintaining trees, natural foliage, and not just lawns, they help to both disperse the flooding and the flow, and they also reduce the velocity of the water coming down, which helps limit the erosion damage and downstream flooding, and is kind of able to mitigate it throughout the community and spread the force and flow. The rest of the season, these stream buffers provide significant service environmentally to the salmon, trout, Dolly Varden that reside in the streams. My house is less than 100 yards away from Little Campbell Creek. My son turns 2 next week, and already he absolutely loves going over to Little Campbell Creek and catching 4- and 6-inch Dolly Varden with me. I love having a healthy stream that close. I value the stream buffers for the service they provide, filtering chemicals, runoff from our roads, our streets, lawns, fertilizers. The stream system, Campbell Creek, Chester Creek that we have, the trout and salmon, the fish in those streams, I've spent countless hours wading, floating, chasing those fish. Having that stream buffer in sections where somebody's yard doesn't butt up right to the stream, it's really nice. I don't feel like I'm invading someone's backyard when I'm there fishing on a public waterway. So I would encourage and ask that you strongly consider the 50-foot setbacks as a bare minimum for Title 21. Thank you.
Just hang in here. We have some questions in the queue. Commissioner Hickel?
I see that you would like to see the buffers go up to 50 feet. And granted that most of Anchorage has been developed to this standard of 25 feet, do you think that with the little land we have left that would have a significant impact on the remaining lots to have a 50-foot setback?
I would argue it would not have a significant impact. It certainly would have an impact, and it's a compromise at 50 feet. You know, environmentally, scientifically, 300 feet would be the recommended setback, which obviously is not practical in an urban environment. Many communities have kind of set that compromise even at 100 feet, which...
Well, I was just,
Sorry,
you see the position we're in?
Yeah.
Is that there's fish in the stream now, and if we were to tell the people with existing lots that are 100 feet deep, they tell them that they can only go up to 50 feet of it, and by the time you get the driveway and the house in there, if you've got enough room, then they could build a house. And do you think in that sense that is there enough significant difference in increasing these setbacks for that impact on the public that the fish would get healthier, bigger, or what can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think a 50-foot setback would make a significant difference for the streams and for the landowners, for other people downstream. When people upstream of you are encroaching on the stream, what that does, especially times of flooding, high runoff, that increases the velocity, pushes more of the water downstream. So those people living downstream experience greater effects than those living further upstream when you've got a shorter setback.
Commissioner Wilson?
You mentioned flooding, and just wondered if you have any statistics on how many lots in an average year, or how much of the front footage, shall we say, is flooded.
I don't have statistics on that. I've looked at the flood hazard maps for the Anchorage area with what's the 50 and 100-year floodplain, which would be 1 or 2% chance of experiencing flooding in any given year.
Yeah, it seems that we need to deal with some statistical
Certainly.
facts on this in order to even deal with your point.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you get college credit for your testimony?
No.
All right. Well, thank you for volunteering. Would the next person please come forward?
I'm not as tall as that person. Hi, my name is Johanna Urick.
I'm sorry, could you say that a little bit louder and spell?
My name is Johanna Urick. That's spelled E-U-R-I-C-H. That's the hard part. The front is easy. That's J-O-H-A-N-N-A.
Thank you.
And I live in a lower income house in a poor neighborhood here in Midtown in Spenard. And I don't need to tell you what my income is. When I was making a lot of money, I was working for public radio. That should tell you something. Not much. But I do want to say that I support the provisionally adopted Title 21. One of the reasons I support it is that it follows 2020, which was designed to increase the available residential units in this town because we need more room for more people to live here. And I came up here basically to answer a question that was posed to a man from the Waterways Council. The provisionally adopted Title 21 did do that. That actually allowed for more people to live here while maintaining a certain quality of life. And it's a quality of life that many of us who live in Anchorage, at least I have, enjoyed for over 30 years and hope to enjoy for another 30 years before I kick the bucket. But I just wanted to make sure that that correction is understood. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify? Please come forward at this time.
I just have a letter that a gal that couldn't be here tonight sent it. I'd like to give it to you tonight.
You can give it to the secretary. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify? Thank you very much. Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Tim Potter, 31-year resident of Anchorage and planner, speaking for myself tonight. A very smart lady who looks way better in gray-white hair than I said earlier tonight, probably what underscores what we should be thinking about, that we're all in this together. And it's not really one side against the other. We're really here trying to work on the same thing. I will say that now, 10 years into a process that has felt wrong for about 10 years, I'll try and provide some general thoughts and then maybe some specific thoughts, and then hopefully you'll have a lot of questions for me. Generally, I am in support of the provisionally adopted code, as with the amendments proposed by Mr. Coffey, with 3 exceptions, which I hope you can ask me about later. In planning, there's a hierarchy, and it's very important to keep this in mind, and this is why I've had bad feelings about this process. That there is a comprehensive plan, which is our 2020 plan, and that really sets the vision, sets the goals, sets some of the strategies and policies. Then you've got supportive elements like the Wetlands Management Plan, LRTP, OSNHP, Trails Plan, Transit Plan, and the basic infrastructure of the city. We've chosen to do district plans, but we haven't done that very well, so that was really the next step. From that, there would then be a land use plan map developed that is really the map that guides us as to what the uses are appropriate to implement the comprehensive plan. And then we would do the land use regulations or code modifications to implement that land use plan. We appear to have been in a hurry, and we've been for the last 10 years, and we've been doing it without enough information and without really knowing what we want, because we really don't have a land use plan map. Largely, I would leave most of the zoning districts alone and use the land use plan map with an adopted user's guide that explains and qualifies what you can do in your zoning with the overlay of where you fall and dependent upon where you are in that land use plan map. I would develop a very strong and real economic incentive program, and I want the Commission to remember that the municipalities had the same 10 years they've been working on this to develop a plan going forward for incentive programs to get the kind of development here that we want, and nothing has been forthcoming. Critical items, the OOPS clause, community councils, alternative plan compliance option, new and mixed use districts, single family in the R3 district, connectivity formula, which I say no to. Using land use plan map as an inclusive overlay map will eliminate the need for property owners to go through a rezone exaction process in order to implement the plan.
I have to stop you, but Commissioner Parks has a question.
I'd like to know what your 3 exceptions are.
Thank you. The exception to Mr. Coffey's amendments are that he, while he does a good job of taking a position that I take, that the provisionally adopted code suggests that the developer or applicant go out and organize and hold a public meeting. I think that really strips and erodes the purpose of the community councils as they were established as the grassroots format for a government in 1975 when both the municipality and the city incorporated together. It's a strong system. It's been had budget cuts. It's gone through a lot of pain. And if we take one more thing away, I fear that the entire system will fail, which I believe is a bad thing for the city. So I believe that the community council should be the place that the applicants go to let them hear about the projects, let them talk about them, find out information, pass resolutions in support or against if they choose to. But what I differ from Mr. Coffey is that some of the community councils have chosen to be inactive during the summer. And unfortunately, with the time schedule that we have here, sometimes it is, and often it is not convenient to just wait until September to be able to go to the community council, because as it's currently written, you have to go through that process first before you can even apply for your rezone or conditional use. So if that specific community council does not choose to meet during those times, try and reach out to the executive committee. If they still decide that they don't want to have a special meeting, then you've done your thing. Those community councils that choose to be active year-round then get an automatic chance to put us on the agenda. We go speak to them, come back again if we need to, whatever it takes.
That's one item. The second is the effective date. He suggests an effective date of 1/13. I believe that there's already projects that are in the planning phases right now, and it is really not that far to 1/1/13, and that we will catch a number of projects, or we will prevent a number of projects from going forward until something happens. So I would suggest that another year be added onto that. Then there is a clear choice that those projects that have already started or making commitments or buying properties, doing due diligence studies, can move forward knowing what they're dealing with. If they choose to use the provisionally adopted code as it is adopted at that point, then so be it, and that's great. I don't believe that people understand how long it takes to get some of these projects moved, get onto the property, get a plan, and move forward. And lastly is the OOPS clause. There's an indication, and what he has suggested is that there be a 2-year period in which there can be a very rapid assent to the assembly if a project or anything that the community is doing, you determine that, oh crap, we didn't take that into account, that has an impact that certainly was not the intent of the code, and we need to get it fixed, and we don't need to go back through the process of waiting 2 or 3 months to get to P&Z and another 2 to 4 months to get to the assembly. This would be a very rapid, hopefully 30-day or less process to go get clarification from the assembly, modify the code by ordinance, and get on with life. Mr. Coffey indicates that a 2-year period for the OOPS clause to have that very fast approach is adequate. I don't want to say I told you so in advance, but we are still finding incongruities and problems in the existing Title 21 that we go back and determine weren't clearly the intent of the makers of those ordinances, and they're having an impact that we need to go back and get cleared up. The document that you have in front of you is so complex, so interlaced, has not been tested and vetted very well when it comes down to really where the rubber meets the road. There's going to be very significant issues that come up much longer than the first 2 years. And my recommendation would be keep that quick vetting period back to the assembly to clarify the intent available without a deadline, is my opinion.
Commissioner Phelps?
Sorry, I was listening to testimony here. A couple of points of clarification, and you were mentioning before that you supported Coffey's recommendation on the community councils, and my understanding of Coffey's recommendations is that he does support going to the community councils for a review of a project.
He does, and that's why I said he supports going to the community council, which I underscore and support.
Okay.
However, he says you shall meet with the community council before you can go forward. What he's not taking into account is that there are a number of community councils that take the summer off.
Sure.
And that is a very difficult situation, and I know it may have some hardship, but it's a choice they've made. If they've chosen to not be available during the summer months, that's a choice they make.
So if I may then, that what you're saying as a recommendation is to accept his recommendation, but to stipulate that it's not required to go forward during a certain period of time when they're not active. Is that
I believe that you should go to the community council. I do that with every project, and it's the way it should be done. But when you have a situation where you can't even apply until such time as you've met with the community council, if you go and you have a client come in and they want to start doing something in May, you can't make it because they'll have June, July, August off. You're basically dead in the water and can't even apply and start the process for at least 3 more months.
Actually, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm actually more worried about language right now. And what I'm trying to get across is yes, it makes sense to contact community councils except during that period that they're not active. Would it be possible to word it that way and get to your intent?
Yes, and I will get you some language.
Okay, good. Let's go back to your land use plan map and how you would utilize that. And by the way, thank you for the comment on the land use plan map. I think those were right on. But I don't understand exactly how you would use the map in terms of, well, just go ahead and explain that part of the process again.
Well, let me give you a couple of explanations that are in real life how you might be able to do it. Arctic Boulevard in the comp plan is set up as a transit-supported corridor. That has a specific meaning as far as promoting density, both in residential and in jobs, and having a mixture of some supportive commercial and business services and personal services in nodes along that corridor. Great. So now you overlay your land use plan map over the top of that. And that land use plan map is like a bubble diagram, so to speak, has different colors on it that says this is what we'd like it to do. So even if the underlying zoning doesn't necessarily allow you to do the mixed density development or higher density, because you've been overlain by this land use plan map that says, we'd really like you to do some mixed-use development, have some commercial stuff on the bottom and offices and residential above. I believe it should be inclusive and say that those are the rules you're going to live under. And the fact that the underlying zoning doesn't let you do that, and you'd have to rezone to a new zoning district that's been devised, I think is wrong. And I think that what happens is there'll be a disincentive for those people to participate. Because let's say you have on the land use plan map, you have something that says you can do mixed use. But you have to go through a rezone. Well, guess what happens? The provisionally adopted code and the staff is suggesting that property owner is then the one responsible, not the city, but that person is the one who's going to spend 25 to 50 grand to do a rezone. And during that rezone process in front of this commission and the assembly is going to face exactions against their property and potentially limitations as far as use, and will likely come back for a site plan review requirement of some kind based on the provisionally adopted code and get hit up with exactions again. Now, what do you think the incentive is for that party to go through that process and potentially lose even more land use rights than they currently have to participate in the greater good plan? That seems back-asswards to me. If we want it to be that use, let's say it on the land use plan map and get on with life.
Okay, so what I'm getting from you is that there's two maps, if you will. One is a zoning map, and the other is a comprehensive plan map. And by the way, I agree with you in terms of having a plan map and having specificity in the plan map and using the plan map in decision making. And well, this is an aside, but no, that's an aside. No, it's not appropriate. Okay, so my understanding then is that if you had a project that came in and it was consistent with the plan map, so let's make believe it's industrial in zoning and it's going to be, commercial in the plan map, you wouldn't go through a rezoning. That requested use would be granted by right because it's consistent with the plan map. Is that what I'm getting?
Yes, and let's go to your example. Okay, the South Anchorage C Street corridor and the industrial area, the Target property that we talked about last week on behalf of Target. That piece of property, if there were a land use plan map that said that it could be done commercially, or the piece to the north of 100th, let's take that as even a better example. You want the front of the property, it's about 40 acres there. If you wanted the front of that property to be commercial and or industrial, you could have that in the land use plan map. And the back of the property would be retained as industrial. So on that piece of industrially zoned land, you'd still accommodate commercial use and or industrial use on the front half. The back half, adjacent to King Street, where the real industrial corridor is, would be reserved for industrial. That type of thing. So, and there'd be a user's guide that would explain how to use the land use plan map.
Oh, that's interesting, because that's what was done many years ago in Turnigan. They actually used the comprehensive plan map as the basis for the development in that area.
Well, you know, part of what frustrates me the most about the 10 years that we've been at this is that if we could have taken the top 5 things, parking, landscaping, design guidelines, and a couple other things, and done some very quick changes to the existing code, we probably would have addressed 80% of the community's immediate concerns, and we would have been able to have enhanced landscaping, reduced parking and asphalt coverage of the town, because we would have gone to a reduced parking rate, and we could have enjoyed that over the last 10 years worth of projects. Now, how frustrating is it to lose a decade?
It's very frustrating. I would agree with you. Our dilemma right now is we have a very complex, very convoluted code in front of us we have to make a decision on, and there's just a whole host of issues out there. And I'm trying to search for a way where it's practical for us to address some of these issues. And what's occurred to me is that what we really need to do, I like your opinion upon this, is we need to identify what the principal problems are with the code, fix those problems, and allocate our time toward that. Now, when I was reviewing the Coffey report, I'll call it that, it seemed like he was identifying the policy issues and identifying for the commission a way to go. It could be this way or it could be that way. There's alternative ways. And it seemed what he was suggesting is that make a decision on the policy first before you make a decision on the specifics of the code. So what's your reaction to that approach?
I think absolutely, and that's why I actually really enjoyed and appreciate the amount of hours that he put into that, and whatever his contract was with the mayor and the city, I know that he did so much more than that as far as work and consideration of what was going on. I think that a lot of the things, especially, and I'll give you an example based on today's discussion about the housing study, that there's, you know, the rules are in the provisionally adopted code that you can't have single family in an R3 zoning district. Well, I would love to come and show the commission a variety of photographic evidence of projects outside of Anchorage and outside of Alaska that have a mixture of single-family homes and multifamily homes that are developed in a way that the street front looks like it's single-family homes, and you have townhouses or condominiums or apartments behind that in a courtyard fronting on a green belt in the back, and it's amazing. Now, we're going to create a situation where you can't do that. You won't be able to do cottage family or cottage homes, which has been very successful in a pocket-type compact development program in Shoreline area in North Seattle, on Whidbey Island, and now in Redmond by their infamous town center. So I think we need to be very careful how we approach some of these things, because we're going to rule out some of the design alternatives that we need to have to answer our future questions and problems. That's what I'm concerned about. So when Dan sets up a policy and gives you a choice and does make a recommendation, maybe this one needs to be studied a bit more. Maybe it needs to be modeled and tested a bit more. Maybe there should be a work session put together with some of the public and private sector people that are dealing with these issues. I think those are all good recommendations, and that's why I'm supporting it. Now, a lot of people are probably surprised I'm supporting the provisionally adopted code, just because of how frustrated I am about the whole process. Being very involved in the first 3 years, then giving up for a number of years, and now jumping back in. It's been terribly frustrating, and every time I drive around town and see what could have been for the last decade, I get more upset. So,
there are several other people in the queue, so Ms. Dean, do you have a question?
Through the chair, my question is for Tim on the design criteria manual and user's guide. I would like to hear your comments on those two issues.
Well, there's references to the user guide all through the provisionally adopted code, and none of us have seen it. We don't know what it is. It would be nice to know what it's going to be and what it's going to do. And then the design criteria manual. I know during one of your work sessions it was talked about. One of the limitations is that design criteria manuals, and I fear the design guideline or the user's guide, will be policy adopted. And that doesn't mean it has to be a bad thing, but when it doesn't consider the timeline and time sequences of the development community, then it is a problem. Let me give you a specific example. The Target development in South Anchorage, 104th Avenue, was built by Target. The design was put in, it was reviewed by the city, it was approved by the city. The materials were gotten, the construction contracts were let, and when they started building the road the next year, the inspector stopped the job and said, wait a minute, the insulation type that you're using in the subbase of the road should be a whatever 60 rather than a whatever 40. So in the period of that winter, getting ready for construction, even though the plans were approved by the city, the design criteria manual now said it needed to be something else. And, you know, I guess the way it works is that because it's so frustrating, it's just easier to roll over, bend over, whatever you do to keep the project going, because the contractor then gets claims for times that he shut down. And Mr. Pruz knows what all this is about. And, you know, when the city doesn't understand what it's doing when it changes policy in the middle of a development or contracting or materials ordering sequence for a year for the development, it's a big problem. And it has impacts that apparently the city, even in the sections of the city that should understand it, don't get it or don't care. And the perception is they just don't care. I know that's not the case, but it comes out that way. So the reason I'm bringing that one up and why it was talked about in the work session is that this is just another problem for the people out there trying to do things that have their money in the game. So.
All right. Thank you very much. Commissioner Mulcahy.
Thank you. You've covered many of the items on the 15 list. I think about, by my notes, 6 or 7. Any other ones you care to address this evening?
Probably the institutional master planning is a key one. Mr. Turtledes talked about it earlier tonight. I do have some specific language, and it has to do with the applicability portion of the code, which is, let's see, 2103, 110, and under B, applicability. At the end of that line, to clarify the applicability and intent, it should say institutional campuses will be looked at as one parcel, allowing flexibility in the location of principal and accessory uses throughout the campus. And the issue is there, as we talked about APU before, is that when you have public roads or lots that make up the campus, there are some things in code, like Providence Drive was a greater than a Class 1 collector. It was a minor arterial, so the University of Alaska couldn't have shared parking even on their own property without getting a variance. APU has an issue that if they have snow storage, they'd like to be able to do snow storage on a holistic standpoint for their campus and treat it like one piece of property. The fact is they have some subdivided properties, and they're subdivided for the purposes of making financing of buildings that they have built and or leased easier, because you can't let the whole campus be tied up with the financial guarantees to a bank or a financial institution. So you subdivide it. Now all of a sudden the city comes out and enforces something that says, wait a minute, a snow dump isn't, or a snow disposal site or a storage pile isn't something that you can do on this lot
because it's not a principal permitted use, even though it's accessory to the entire campus. So this language and applicability would make the interior lot lines disappear for those kinds of things. So if you have parking, you can do smart parking so that you don't have to have on each lot the required parking. In a campus, you want to position very carefully the parking and have the interior of the campus be very functional and very open to pedestrian access, and do it as a holistic approach. And that's all we're asking for.
Mr. Potter, there are several other commissioners in the queue, but before I call on the next commissioner, I want to know if there's anyone else in the audience who wishes to testify. All right, thank you. Commissioner Hickel, did that answer your questions? All right, thank you. Commissioner Hickel.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about the oops clause, and I apologize if you were more clear. I was flipping through the suggestions that we had from Dan Coffey, because I read about the community councils. I thought he was in support, but
right. The oops clause. This is when I get to smile at Mr. Phelps, because some of you may not realize that Mr. Phelps has a different notoriety than some of you might know. He was in charge of the physical planning section, long-range planning, for Anchorage years ago. And in that, he would do long-range planning, and he would come up with an assortment of different ordinances. And we would always banter back and forth about how, this is great, Bruce, but, there may be some hidden implications here that we don't get. And what are we going to do? And do you realize how disruptive it is to find something, even 6 months to a year after an ordinance is adopted, and you go to do a project and take it through the system, and during the review process, typically at planning or the zoning plan review desk, something comes up and says, oh, you can't do this. The code says this. And you go, well, that's not what the code says. And you read the black and white, and sure as heck, that's what it says. But that wasn't the intent. So then, in the old days, and currently today, you have to physically get someone at the administration, typically, or an assembly person, to introduce a modification to the code to clarify what the intent was and to get it straightened out. And guess what? It takes a minimum of 60 to 90 days to get to you, and then the assembly, unless it gets expedited, it doesn't get forwarded until after you actually sign your resolution, so that's usually the next month after that. Then it heads off to the assembly, and it'll take at least a month to get there, sometimes 4 months. I don't understand why it takes that long sometimes. So that takes a whole year away for an innocent little glitch that nobody ever intended to happen. The oops clause allows you to have the planning director, whoever's in charge of the city at the time, whatever, can say, oh, that really was not the intent. We need to get that fixed because we don't want to hold up your project. Or we don't want to hold up this city project, which also happens. And you can go within about 30 days, get to the assembly, they confirm that in fact that was not the intent, the ordinance gets changed, and you're on your way.
But the further part of that was, how long do you think we should have? 2 years wasn't long enough. We're still dealing with Title 21 oopses from the
this
old code.
600 plus pages and how complex and interlaced this thing is, and how little actual testing it's had, you're going to see changes at least a decade or more out.
So you think we could leave that open-ended?
I absolutely believe that there is no harm in leaving that open-ended, and there is harm by putting a 2-year cap on it, because we're barely going to get, I guess, out of the starting gate in 2 years. So.
Thank you.
I guess I'm going to interject myself here and say I do have a comment about the oops clause and the bypassing of the Planning and Zoning Commission and going directly to the Assembly. What I would say at this particular point in time is this has been a very hardworking commission, and aside from perhaps Ms. Osiander, I believe every member on this commission knows more about the provisionally adopted chapters than almost anyone else in the public arena, so to speak. And our mission and ordinance is quite broad in terms of what the Planning and Zoning Commission is supposed to do, and I'm not in favor of the bypass. I believe that this matter these oopses could come before the Planning and Zoning Commission in a rather expedient manner, and could then, if that decision was not satisfactory, could be appealed to the Anchorage Assembly. But this has been a very hardworking commission, and currently is very knowledgeable about the provisionally adopted chapters of Title 21, and perhaps the only person that knows as much or more is Ms. Osiander, and unfortunately she is going to be going off the Assembly next June. So it does give me some concern, your proposal. Commissioner Wilson, do you have a comment or a question?
I hate to extend the discussion on the oops and related, but it goes to your very good point that we had actually been discussing. We've got the cart before the horse in many respects here, not having a land use plan on which we can truth test the words that are presented here and the policies that they represent. We're kind of backing into reality, and I'm just frustrated with being put in this position. Now, there are some things that are oopsie and that are, yes, we didn't mean that. Everybody agrees, consensus, and go forward. That's one kind of group. But there's a lot of others that are in a more of a policy sense and will take a lot more discussion and thought. Looking at just considering how many hours we've spent on this thing, and we're just starting to get our arms around it. We don't have our arms around it as a group yet, in my opinion. A couple might, but I'm very hesitant to support anything that I don't understand yet. And I don't think that's why I was selected to be on this commission. I express this because this is, I guess, the best time to talk about what does a commissioner like me do in this situation. We don't want to throw everything out. At least I don't. We don't want to accept everything whole cloth. I don't. But we've got some things that we just do not understand, and we've tried.
I think those are really good questions, Commissioner Wilson, and I deeply respect Mr. Potter's comments, but I would like to be able to conclude his testimony and have that sort of discussion really amongst the commission members. So, Commissioner Phelps and then Peter Mulcahy, and I think that concludes the people in the queue.
So I'm looking at this Title 21 rewrite topics for questions, and the way I'm looking at this is that these are issues that you have pondered, that you're identifying as being areas that need either additional work or on which you have an opinion, okay? And I suspect you do have an opinion on some of this stuff. And we don't have enough time in this meeting to go through each of these items to get what is your opinion on this. Like, for example, if I were to bring up I-2 zoning district, I could ask you the question of what your concerns are, but we don't have enough time for that. Can I ask you to take your document here and then identify what the issue is associated with I-2 zoning district, for example, and what your recommendation would be? And I would appreciate that type of information, and we just don't have the time to go through it right now.
Absolutely. I really do wish that you'd ask me about the one on the bottom.
Okay, I'll answer the one on the bottom.
The Quonset huts.
Make it brief, Mr.
This
Potter.
is,
Thank you.
And I only put Quonset huts on here because this is part of my frustration again, that there was a reason that Quonset huts were put in as a prohibited use any place in town. And it's because historically a lot of the Quonset huts came off of the bases when things were being redone. Now, that said, we've matured. If you read what is prohibited, it is actually an architectural roof style. And it's very specific in the provisionally adopted code about what is prohibited. And I think it's a huge mistake because I think that we are not smart enough to understand that that might be one of the answers for affordability. Guess why Quonset huts, from a basic design feature and material format, were so successful? They are incredibly efficient. They are a good way to get square footage. They have very efficient use of heat. They can be adapted in a variety of different ways. I don't think that we have looked at materials and design with a roof structure like that. But if Mr. Hickel designed a house and it had, based on the definition of that style of material, it had a ribbed surface and an arch over the top of one of his $1 million homes, you couldn't do that the way that I read the code. Also, you couldn't use an adaptation of a 21st century Quonset type building or structure in principle that has a lot of advantages. You couldn't do that to try and meet any of our housing needs. I think it's a huge mistake.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Mulcahy, you have the last word, or the last question.
All right, I'm not going to, I appreciate you're going to give us some comments on these. That's great. But two things that aren't on here that have come up frequently is once this is implemented, that would create, we've been told, a significant percentage of a commercial, at least commercial, not commercial industrial, would become non-conforming. And then there's been lots of discussion on economic impacts. Have you got any thoughts on either of those two?
Nonconformities. I think the way that the nonconformities has been addressed in the changes that Mr. Mintz has been very involved in, I think adequately address the issue. And there's some examples I can give you of how crazy nonconformities can be taken into account. The other thing is economic impact. I don't believe that we have a real clue what the economic impact of this will be. I'm going to bet that the consultants that originally started the process, who just said, oh, you know, our experience is that there's really no change, maybe 3 to 5%. Well, 3 to 5% of 10 million or 30 million is a lot of money. And maybe the make or break that changes it. I'm betting that in some projects it's going to be as much as 10%, maybe even more. If you take the South Anchorage Target store and set it up against the menu that is required for the big boxes, you can't build that store today.
And that's, I'm afraid you may be right about not having a clue, and that's one of my largest concerns with MOOD, is I don't think we know the economic impact of implementing it, and that scares me.
This may be one of those exercises that we go through and we figure out what's going to happen. But I think one of the real clear things is that I really appreciated the work session that you had and got the report on the residential study, because it is the first time that anybody credible has been able to say what a lot of us thought, that some of the things that are being pressed in the provisionally adopted code from a design solution standpoint aren't financially feasible in the current marketplace without a significant augmentation of funds from somebody at an outrageous rate of 20 to 55%. That's huge. And that underscores Lanny's comment about we're in this together. If we want to push the marketplace in front of the marketplace before it's ripe, then the public who passed or participated in the comp plan needs to understand the only way to do that is to spend money.
and it's going to be spending public money.
All right. Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Potter. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify? Anyone else at all? Seeing and hearing no one, the public hearing on the provisionally adopted chapters of Title 21 is closed. The matter now rests with the Commission. Mr. Parks.
I would make a motion that we take into consideration this public hearing that we've had and have a work session so that we can discuss this openly. If we wanted to continue tonight, I know Mr. Phelps is going to be absent for the next couple of weeks. We'd like to have your input now if you'd like to have that this evening. But I would like for us to pick a date that we can start our deliberation in a work session so that it's a format that we can work better in, I believe.
Mr. Phelps.
I will be out for the first 2 weeks in April, and this is your critical point in this particular process. And I would like to take the opportunity this evening to at least express my thoughts and views on this, since it's the only opportunity I have.
Please do.
Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We are in a conundrum, guys, to say the least, because we're in a situation where we've had the community work on this for about 10 years now. There's an expectation that something is going to get done. At the same time, we've heard considerable testimony from the development community. There are some basic flaws inside the process. And the other aspect we keep coming up again and again is we don't know the economic impacts and we're uncertain. And when you adopt something is that you're going to be adopting something you don't know what's going to happen. Frankly, if I were you, well, no, I'll say it differently, I am scared to make a vote like that. Because if I'm making a vote, I want that vote to mean something. And right now, I can tell you right now, from my perspective, I don't understand it in the complexity that's presented to us. And frankly, the process we have used is to go through and look at the individual changes item by item. In my opinion, it's not the way it would have should have been done. The first aspect is that we should have had a land use plan map. It's water on the bridge, I suppose, but we really needed that, and if we don't have that, frankly, our hands are tied to a very large degree. We're also presented with the Assembly expecting to take action on this in the first part of June, as I recall. I was there last week on a different issue, and I heard the discussion. And the discussion was basically, we're going to start this evening or maybe a week from now, or are we going to do it in June? And the answer was in June. The way that translates to me is that we have an end date for the information to go to the Assembly if we are going to have our comments realistically considered. Now, you could take the point of view that, it doesn't matter, but frankly, the only reason you do things like this is to be successful, to actually implement something that works. And why spend all the time if you're not going to be able to do something that actually works for the Assembly? We make recommendations to the Assembly. If I'm looking at the process we're using right now, and I happen to have done this before quite a few times, if you go through the process that we're going through right now, I really don't think you're going to complete this in the next 2 years, okay? And so I think you're going to have to make a basic decision about what is a practical way to proceed in order to get our comments in by about the middle of June. And the only way that I can come across that we make some degree of sense is by using the Coffin Report as the basis for going through the revisions of Title 21. I think that what we're hearing over and over again is that there are certain basic problems that need to get addressed, and we should be addressing those problems. We've heard again and again, landscaping and parking and what have you. The Coffin Report goes through this in some detail, but most especially what it does is identify what the policy are as opposed to the nuances of the code. And so what it basically is setting up is a decision process where you decide the policy first before you decide the code revisions. An example of this is UDC. And we've heard UDC in the entire time, and I don't particularly support that, but that's the way the discussion's going. But what he does is he basically sets it up as a decision. does it make sense to transfer all the authorities from the commission over to UDC? Yes or no? You get to decide on that. But if you make the policy call, then the recommendations fall into place almost immediately. And what he's done is he's actually gone through and answered those questions. If, in fact, you elect to go this particular way, these are the changes you have to make. So a lot of that work's already been done for us. So I really would recommend the commission think long and hard about the process we have to use, the time we have to do it in, the amount of stamina we have to do this, and also whether or not we're going to be willing to vote on something we truly don't know everything about.
Thank you. That was very well put, and I know that there are several other commissioners that share your concern. I am going to poll the commissioners at this particular time and ask for their individual input on how it is that they think that we should proceed, because each one of them have spent dozens of hours on this matter. Ms. Dean, we're going down the row.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that we should look at all the policy issues related to Title 21, the provisionally adopted chapters. The really hard part is we can't pull chapters out individually and look at Chapter 1, then Chapter 2, Chapter 3. We really have to look at it as a whole. That's why I think we need to look at the policies and break down that way. I also think we need to look at all our purpose statements. Some of them I don't think we have any business, being involved with. I think some of it needs to be entirely thrown out. But, a lot of our problem is going to be, what do we do? Do we go ahead and say we don't approve of the provisionally, chapters? Do we say that we don't want them at all? Do we say we only want portions? It's going to be a very, very difficult decision. Personally, I'm having a real hard time saying that as a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission that I would like to see the provisionally adopted chapters changed and then instituted. I think that I'd like to go back to the original Title 21 that we're with right now and not use any of the provisionally adopted chapters or modified chapters.
With or without recommended amendments?
With or without.
Okay. Commissioner Hickle?
I'm in favor of the policy change, and I don't think we're any different than the people that have been working on it for the last 10 years. This thing is so controversial that they've passed the buck to us. Everybody's worked on this, and they've worked on it, and I believe that I'm leaning towards the original Title 21 and fixing the problem. I know nobody likes to hear that, but this is a tremendous responsibility for us in the Assembly, and I don't take it lightly. I struggle with some of this stuff because I don't know the economic consequences. I know the niceties are great, but I've got 5 kids, and when they work and live in Anchorage, I'd like them to be able to afford a home, whether they're driving a bus or driving the economy. If they want to own a home, it'd be nice if they could still live here in Anchorage. That may be tough or difficult, but I do think that we need to get the policy straight. That would help guide and make our decisions a lot easier. And if we can't get to that end game, then if it's still too much of an unknown, then I'd be in favor of getting back to the basics of the original Title 21. That's just where I'm at this point. But I'd like to see how this process played out. I don't want to throw out the work that people have done for the last 10 years, but also I'm going to take it seriously enough to know that the people that have been working on it for 10 years could have solved the problem, and now it's in my lap, and I'll do the best I can with it.
Thank you, Commissioner Hickle. Commissioner Pruse.
Well, I have a little bit different take. I agree on obviously first addressing the policy, how the commission wants to proceed. That being said, once that filters through all the chapters, I think what we'll be left with will be somewhat different than what we're seeing now and somewhat less complicated. Then I typically go with the basic questions. Why is the amendment or why is this change in front of us? What's the ramifications? You would depend on staff and the private industry to tell us that. What's the economic ramifications? The basic, what I call due diligence. I don't think it has to be protracted. And then we move on. And so I think with Bruce's first comments that the policy first, I think it will lead us down a path that won't be quite as cumbersome. And if we have consistent questions that answers the questions that we all have about what's remaining, I think we'll get to a finish line. And I think we can do it reasonably well.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Peter and then come back. Commissioner Mulcahy.
I'm not sure if I'm a hybrid of what's been said. Yes, I think that we have spent a lot of time going pretty much cover to cover through this whole thing, and as you mentioned earlier, this group now knows as much about the provisionally adopted charters as anyone else possibly, except Mr. Potter, who's lived it day by day, and then Debbie Oceana and her committee. I think that was time well spent. That puts us in a position where we can now, I agree with Commissioner Phelps, let's step back, take a look at those policy decisions, and make an analysis of how we implement those and whether that implementation, which one aligns better, these provisionally adopted or the original, the currently adopted. And I think we just start working through those policy decisions and see where they come, bring in expert testimony where required to get us assistance, and we'll make the best decisions. And if there's been a lot of work that's gone into this, and I have a tremendous respect for all those people that have put the time and effort in, but we got to do what's best for this community in the long run.
Thank you. Commissioner Wilson.
In past months and years, the citizens spoke through their elected officials with a certain policy in mind, a set of policies, and it had developed over a period of years. Over the more recent time, I think the citizens' mood has changed, and I think that we're the first group to get hit with the change, and we are grappling with how to honor the work that's been done, but also not do harm, and not do something that we don't know whether it's harmful or not. I think everybody agrees. Most people agree on most of the overall 2020 goals. It's the translation into actual code that is stumping us here, and I think we've got to say to ourselves, our job is to figure a way to implement the overall comprehensive plan goals in a way that makes sense and is economically correct as well as socially correct. And so we can't do that, as Bruce Phelps, Commissioner Phelps correctly pointed out. Going at it on a line-by-line basis is not going to work. We need to have a framework, and I think that we're fortunate to have had the benefit of the coffee study, and it's the one we have. I don't know of any other way of approaching it. Look at the policies and moving, but the only issue is where's the land use map? That's what really allows us to figure out whether something will work or not on the ground. And I'm real troubled by that. I'm almost ready to say, go out and do it. Go out and do it. So what would it look like? but I'm told that that would be a horrendous task for the staff, and in a reasonable time frame. So I think at least we need to look at the policies and work through the issues that have been identified by the public and through our own discussions, and see what fits those policy decisions. And if something doesn't fit in there, then either take it out or tweak it.
Vice Chair Parks?
Well, I have similar feelings to most of the folks. Several have hit, and I agree with Commissioner Phelps that we really do need to start with a policy. I see this as something like painting a picture. You start with a background, and we've got the background now. We'll be filling in the pieces as we go. I'm certainly not willing to give up on this project. I think I've fought the battle too far, and I've spent way too many hours to say I'm done. And I respect the work that staff has done and that the public has put in the time and effort, energy to come out and testify. I think we owe it to them and to ourselves to finish the project. Will it be perfect? No. I can absolutely guarantee it won't be perfect. We'll have some oops clauses in here, and we know that. But I think with direction, with some work sessions that allow us to grab and grasp those issues that are out there, with handling the policy issues, which I think are very, very important, I think that'll clean up a lot of it, then we'll be able to move on. I think if you don't set yourself a deadline, you never reach the end, and I think we need to do that. I think we need to set a process in place. I'm willing to work to do that. I understand we get overtime, so and
better food, yeah.
So, but I guess I want it to come to fruition. I don't think that we need to rush it, but when I look at some of the things that we remember in life, like the pyramids and things like that, they weren't built in 6 weeks, but they were built in 10 years, and somebody had to finish it. And I kind of see that that's the task that we've been given, is to put the cornerstone in, to finish the top, to get rolling. And I know there's lots of pieces that went there before, and I'm not trying to take credit for that at all. But we need to get the process underhand so that people can know what to expect for the next 20 years. And that's really where we are. We need some expectation today, not this very moment. We can't continue to put off. Somebody's got to make the decision. And I think we've got the right attitude and the right minds to be able to do that.
Thank you very much. Well, you've all been much more eloquent than what I can be at 10:25 tonight. So I share all of your concerns and your comments. There does seem to be a certain amount of cohesiveness in terms of how we should be moving forward and our desires. We are not meeting the following Monday night. We have a regular meeting the first week in April, and that is our case night when we'll be looking at cases. The following Monday night is our first opportunity for a work session, and a room has been reserved for us, and we will begin that meeting at 5:30 with policy discussions, really. And this will give us a couple of weeks to sort of think about our game plan. The concern that I have is how we then, I believe that we will be able to fairly quickly come together on our policy issues, because most of them have been pretty thoroughly vetted in the work sessions that we've had. But then how we go about putting those policies in place with the various chapters, I think, is going to be our ultimate challenge. So I look forward to working with all of you and coming to some conclusion that's a benefit to our community. Commissioner Phelps, do you have some additional comments?
Yeah, again, I won't be here for the work session, but I have thought about this somewhat. And I think that if you begin with a coffee report as at least a beginning point, that is the way I would proceed because it's practical, it's there, it's been vetted. And then I would think that what you want to do is, there have been some very specific changes that have been recommended by the development community here. I would get those and I would put them in the right sections, of, so to speak, and then review those as well. What I would suggest is that some of us are more expert in some areas than others, and we need to break this thing down. I am willing to take chapters 1, 2, and part of 3 and work those, because I'm knowledgeable about that aspect. And I think that others, like Connie, for example, knows residential, and other people know commercial. And when we get to that section on commercial residential, all those standards, then you guys can take over the responsibility and lead us through. I frankly think that we're going to have to be dependent upon ourselves more than anybody else in this process.
That is why we were appointed. Okay. Commissioner Pruse.
I just said, I assume that would be after we agree on the policy, then we take the chapters.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? Well, what are we voting on? We're not voting on any, huh? Okay. All right. So, Commissioner Parks, do you, could you clarify your motion, please?
I made a motion that we postpone our deliberation until the second Monday in April. Is that correct?
Well, it's not really a deliberation, it's a work session. So it's a...
Completion, I don't know how to word that, completion of the work session?
Well, no, it's not. I think it's...
Yeah, there we go. I got the wording now.
Yep. And we have a second by Commissioner Wilson. Is that acceptable to you? All right. Is there any objection? Seeing and hearing none, that motion passes unanimously. There is no other business before the commission. Are there any comments from staff at this time?
No, Madam Chairman. I know it's a very, very difficult process you're going through right now. It is complex to the nth degree, both by process and substance, and we'll give you all the support we can.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that very much. May I have a motion for adjournment? Moved and seconded moved by Parks, seconded by Wilson. Is there any objection to postponement? Seeing and hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.